Every morning, Linda and I have this habit of staying in bed for a few extra minutes after the alarm goes off. We've been together long enough to know what works best for us. Those warm, lazy minutes feel so good, but they come at a cost, a frantic rush to get ready for work. Back when the kids were still at home, that mad dash included getting them off to school. Now that they're grown and out of the house, we find ourselves lingering in bed even longer before facing the morning chaos, which always leads to the drive to work. To make things more stressful, I had to leave the house a good 20 minutes earlier than usual today. Linda had to work late tonight, so we decided to carpool since our offices aren't far from each other. But instead of taking my car, I opted to ride my mountain bike to work. The weather forecast promised a beautiful spring day, and it seemed like the perfect opportunity. I took the last bite of my toast, washed it down with a swig of coffee, and was ready to head out. "I'm on my way, honey," I called out toward the bathroom, where Linda was still getting ready. I waited for her to respond, maybe poke her head out the door, but I got nothing. "I'll see you tonight." "I love you," I added, though I was in a rush and didn't have time to dwell on her silence. With that, I tossed my keys in my backpack and headed out the door. Let me introduce myself. I'm John Harris, a 53-year-old office manager at the State Department of Public Works. My wife, Linda, is 49 and works as an administrative assistant in the main office of a manufacturing company. We're a good-looking couple, if I do say so myself, but Linda is stunning, especially for her age. She doesn't look anywhere near 50, and I've noticed plenty of men turning their heads when we're out together. About 10 minutes into my ride, my phone pinged with a text message. A few seconds later, it started ringing. Trying to navigate traffic on a bike while answering a call is a challenge, so I ignored it. By the time I got to work, I was in such a hurry to get dressed for an 8:45 meeting that I forgot all about the phone calls. It wasn't until my afternoon coffee break that I remembered to check my messages. I had 5 from Linda, 2 texts and 3 voicemails. The first text came in at 8:10, saying, "You grabbed the wrong keys." "Call me." The second one arrived at 8:35, "I'm waiting for your call." When I finally listened to the voicemails, the first one, left at 8:11, said, "Hi, honey. You took the wrong set of keys when you left. Could you drop them off at my work this morning? I'm going to need them. Call me." Her voice had a sharp edge to it, which was odd. She didn't need those keys at work. They use a fancy security system with key cards. The second voicemail, left around 10:15, was even more irritable. "What are you doing, John? I've been waiting for the keys all morning. Call me. I have better things to do than wait for you." After 25 years together, 23 of them married, I could tell she was fuming. Her anger dripped from every word. Before I played her last message, I pulled out my keys and laid them on my desk. The final voicemail, left at 12:55, was practically a shout. "Where are you? I'm still waiting for my keys. I don't know what you were thinking this morning, but they better be on my desk this afternoon." Linda wasn't holding back. She was livid. I was taken aback. Lately, it seemed like Linda was always mad at me over nothing. I thought maybe it was something to do with her approaching 50, maybe hormonal changes or something. That's what she told me when I asked why she was acting so differently. She snapped at me when I suggested she see a doctor about it, get some hormone therapy, or whatever they do for menopause. Life with Linda had become pretty difficult lately. Our relationship was strained, but it seemed ridiculous that she'd blow up over a set of keys she didn't even need. I've been trying to work on myself, but I'm no pushover. 2 can play at this anger game, I figured. So, I decided not to call her back and just wait until 5 o'clock to bring her the damn keys. A little after 5, I reached her office, just in time to see her pulling out of the parking lot. Big surprise. Despite the traffic and my bike's capabilities, there was no way I could catch up with her. Not that it mattered, we were both heading home. I knew she'd eventually get out of the gridlock and pick up a speed I couldn't match. So, I stuck to my usual, more direct route to see if I could beat her home. But then, something strange happened. I was caught off guard when I saw her car turning toward a different part of town. It was an easier route for me. I could cut through the park, but definitely not the best way for her. She turned onto a street lined with two-story duplexes and parked at the curb. I had a feeling something was up, so I slowed down and watched from a distance as she climbed the stairs and rang a doorbell, all while typing away on her phone. Even from where I was, I could hear her phone chime with a text. She read the message, walked back to her car, and drove off. What the hell just happened? I muttered to myself. Linda, who was supposed to be working late, had shown up at some random apartment. I gripped the keys in my hand, my mind racing. I recognized her car keys and our house keys, but what was really going on here? However, there was another key that I didn't recognize. I had a hunch that this was the key Linda was so desperate to get back. I walked up to the duplex, climbed the stairs, inserted the key into the front door lock, and turned it. The click of the lock felt like the end of my marriage to Linda. I didn't open the door, though. I needed a moment to think. What was I going to do? The rising anger in me made it tempting to barge into my wife's lover's apartment and tear the place apart. Or maybe I could wait for him and beat the crap out of him. Or I could just go to the police and end up in jail. No, acting out of blind anger wasn't the right move. But I had to do something. I glanced inside the apartment. Technically, I was trespassing, but if I moved fast, I wouldn't get caught. The first thing I saw was a neatly stacked pile of mail on a small table in the hallway. I grabbed the phone bill from the top. The letter was addressed to Erik Larson. I had no idea who he was, but the phone bill could be useful. I slipped it into my backpack. That was enough for now. I didn't want to get caught snooping around someone else's apartment, so I got out of there quickly. Instead of heading straight home, I drove to a nearby hardware store. Within minutes, I had a duplicate key made. I expected Linda to be home by the time I got back, but her car wasn't in the driveway. Whatever her lover had texted her, it must have been to meet somewhere else. I decided to mess with her a bit. I called, but she didn't answer. I didn't leave a text, but I did send her a voicemail. I'm running late too, but I'll bring the keys soon. I'll see you at your office. It only took a few seconds to get a reply. That won't be necessary. I've made other arrangements. Just go home, was her immediate response. In her head, she was probably thinking, and leave me alone, idiot. I had a lousy evening. Linda didn't get home until 10 o'clock, giving me a good 4 hours to stew over what had happened. First, I needed proof of her cheating. With a copy of the key now on my keychain, it would be easy to gather what I needed. The phone bill pointed directly to her lover, Erik Larson. They were constantly on the phone and texting each other, even when Linda and I were together in the evenings. All this time, I thought she was texting the kids. Did I really need to know why she had decided to leave me? No, it didn't matter anymore. Our love had faded over the past 6 months. Indifference, constant nagging, and blame can only go on for so long before a man's love fades. Now I saw it clearly. Linda had been distancing herself from our marriage for a while. Today's discovery was just the final blow to a marriage that had already gone to hell. We were done. There's no benefit to proving adultery in our state. Irreconcilable differences would be the reason, and the judge would split our assets 50-50. But as the cheated husband, I felt I had a lot to gain by reclaiming some of my pride. I wasn't going to let Linda get away with lying while married. The truth would be known to our kids, parents, and friends. And knowing how Linda had changed over the past few months, I wouldn't be surprised if she tried to paint me as the bad guy somehow. I did toy with many revenge scenarios, but I decided not to go down that path. I only had a few years before early retirement, and I didn't want to mess that up. Retirement wouldn't be what I had envisioned all those years ago with Linda, but it was better than ending up in jail and losing my job. At least I'd enjoy my retirement my way, not Linda's. When she finally got home, I decided to let her irritation work in my favor. Maybe she'd start a small argument, which could excuse my icy behavior over the next few days. But sex with Eric must have calmed her down a bit. When she walked in, she wouldn't even meet my eyes. Linda seemed surprised to find me still sitting in the living room. She tossed the spare car key into the dish by the door and grabbed her usual set, which I'd placed there earlier. After one look, she tossed them into her purse. I expected a grunt or something, but she didn't say a word. She headed straight for the bathroom. "I'm tired," she muttered to no one in particular as she walked down the hallway. "I'm going to take a shower and go to bed." "What?" I called after her. "No love tonight?" Her only response was to close the bathroom door behind her and lock it. Do you know many married people who lock the bathroom door? I hadn't noticed it before, but now that I thought about it, she did that a lot when she came home late. God, I was so stupid. No wonder she was leaving me. Before going to bed, I watched the evening show. I hoped Linda was sound asleep. But I swear, she was still awake. Sleep was escaping both of us. The next morning, under the pretense of a meeting, I left early in my car. Instead of heading to work, I went to an electronics store and bought some interesting items. It only took me a couple of hours to wire Eric Larson's apartment for sound and video. While I was there, I had time to look around. The place was nicely furnished, with many items that looked like antiques. I don't know if he had a maid, but the apartment was spotless, not a speck of dust anywhere. I wondered if he was a stickler for cleanliness. It gave me something to think about as I set up the equipment. I had hoped my little surveillance setup would stay under the radar for a few days, at least long enough to capture some scandalous photos of my wife and her lover. It turns out I didn't need to worry about that at all. Back at the office after lunch, another text from Linda popped up, telling me not to wait up because she had another late meeting. I went ahead and scheduled an appointment with the lawyer for the next day. That evening, I drove past Larson's apartment and spotted Linda's car. Despite everything that had transpired over the past 24 hours, the sight of her car still made my heart sink, a fresh stab of her betrayal. Tomorrow was going to be crucial. I drove back home, tempted to check into the town motel. But it seemed absurd to waste money on a place I didn't want to be when none of this was my fault. Once back, I thought about sleeping in the guest bedroom but decided against it. After all, I wasn't the one who had wrecked our marriage. Let Linda take that room. I dumped all of her belongings into the guest room haphazardly, whole drawers piled on the bed and clothes yanked out of her side of the closet and thrown in there. It was a surprisingly therapeutic task. With each armful I carried to the guest room, I felt a bit better. When Linda came home that evening, she looked even worse than she had the night before. She had that disheveled look that suggested she had just come from a marathon session with someone else. Again, she was caught off guard by my presence. She didn't offer any explanations for her tardiness or appearance, as if there was anything she could say that would make it better. I couldn't believe I was the source of such pain. With the impending divorce hanging over us, I grabbed her hand and pulled her towards the bedrooms. "What are you doing, John?" "You're hurting me," she whimpered. I forced myself to sound more confident than I felt. I knew I was on the brink of losing her completely. I needed to act quickly and keep my composure. "Shut up, bitch," I said loudly, surprising even myself with the harshness of my words. It was so unlike me to speak like that, as if I were hitting her with my words. Suddenly, the accusatory glares I'd been receiving for months turned into fear. But was it fear of violence or fear of exposure? I had no idea, and I wasn't about to ask. I opened the guest bedroom door so she could see her belongings stacked in disarray. "Starting tonight, this is your room," I said sharply, shoving her inside. "We're no longer husband and wife." "Stay away from me," I added. "In fact, it'd be better if you packed up and left right now." Linda was furious and tried to resist, insisting, "Oh no, you bastard. If anyone's sleeping in the guest room, it's you." She ranted about all she had done for the kids, for me, and the house, demanding respect or for me to leave. Did I want to argue with her? No. I shoved her back into the guest room with a surprising force. "I'm giving you two choices," I growled. "Either you stay here until the divorce is final, or you move in with Erik Larson right now." Her reaction to Larson's name was immediate. Despite her recent behavior, she knew me well enough to realize I was aware of her affair and had no intention of forgiving her. She knew we would never part as friends. Who could be friends with someone who stabbed you in the back? I could see the defeat in her eyes. She stumbled into the room, threw her clothes aside, and sat on the bed, tears streaming down her face. She muttered something I couldn't catch. "What?" I shouted. "I'm sorry," she said louder. "I was so stupid." "Please don't hate me, you know me, Linda," I replied. "I won't hate you forever, but I'm sure I won't love you either. Hell, I don't even know if I can be around you." I began to close the door but decided to add one final blow. "I'd prefer if you left as soon as possible," I said firmly. "Just sign the divorce papers when they arrive, and we'll never have to see each other again." I shut the door, leaving her behind with her sobs as the last sound I heard. The next day, I retrieved my spy gear from Larson's place and then headed to my attorney. Since my demands were straightforward, he assured me the divorce papers would be ready within 2 days. I paid him up front and left. I tried to return to work, but it proved futile. I finally explained my situation to my supervisor, who advised me to take a few days off. When I drove home, I saw Linda moving her things out and parked further down the street. From the video I had, I recognized Erik Larson helping her. I wanted to beat him up, but with his extra 3 inches and 40 pounds, that wasn't a practical option. I drove away. That night, the real impact of Linda's betrayal hit me. My anger faded, replaced by an overwhelming loneliness I had never felt before. The divorce would have been even more devastating if our children were still living with us. While the absence of them was a blessing, it was also a curse, leaving me with no one to lean on. My parents were gone, and my brother and sister lived far away. I decided to reach out to my 2 daughters, only to find out that Linda hadn't even contacted them yet. She had always been in touch with them while they were in college, so I guess it was easier for her to lie to me than to them. A few weeks ago, if someone had asked me how to handle a cheating spouse, I would have said to stay discreet, keep the peace, and honor the 23 years of commitment as a wife and mother. But now, suffering and desperate for either love or sympathy, I had to confide in my 2 daughters, Emily and Sarah. I was relieved when neither of them questioned me when I revealed that their mother had betrayed me and left me for another man. For a moment, I worried they might have known all along, but seeing their shock and distress reassured me. My barely contained sobs seemed to confirm my story. Their support was a comfort, but it was also a mistake. By the time I reached out to the kids, I had already finished a whole bottle of wine. I'm not much of a drinker. Linda and I would share a bottle or 2 of wine a week, or maybe have a few beers. The problem wasn't the drinking itself, but the self-pity fueled by alcohol. When faced with failure, a man must own up to it. Yet, despite my efforts, I couldn't understand what drove Linda away. My job never interfered with my family life. I only traveled for retraining once every 5 years, and my overtime was minimal and predictable. To be honest, I might have let myself go a bit since turning 50, but I wasn't overweight or out of shape. Larson didn't appear much younger or fitter than I was. I wondered if he was a better lover, which was an area where I had limited experience. Before meeting Linda, I had only 4 girlfriends between the ages of 18 and 28, and Linda and I had a lot to learn together. I didn't think Linda left me for social status either. His apartment wasn't extravagant, and while his furniture was nice, he wasn't a father. We were likely in the same income bracket. As I curled up in the fetal position that night, it struck me that there was no real reason for her departure, other than the fact that I was simply who I was. Can you really struggle with being yourself? Could I stop existing just so everything could be all right? The next morning, around 10 o'clock, I got a call. Without checking the caller ID, I answered the phone. "You son of a bitch," Linda yelled. "You shouldn't have been so rude to Emily and Sarah." For a moment, I considered hanging up, but I also wanted to confront her to end this nightmare. "What's rude, sweetie?" I asked. "Is it the months of cheating, moving in with your lover, or is it all of the above?" There was only silence, which I despised. "Linda, I still have some feelings for you," I said. "I'm not sure if it's my male or female side, maybe just my foolish side, but there's one thing I won't do: lie to our family." "You wouldn't dare," she pleaded. "Not Daddy, please." "Watch me," I said, and hung up. My finger hovered over the speed dial for Linda's father, but I didn't press it. Walter had been struggling since his wife passed away from breast cancer 2 years ago. He was a good man, but in his 80s, his health was fragile, and his will to live seemed a bit weak. I could certainly relate to that feeling today. And he was a good man. I figured it was better to let him live in peace rather than let his daughter's actions ruin his life. My anger began to fade, so I decided to inform Linda of my choice. I picked up Larson's cell phone bill and dialed the number listed. A man's voice answered. I hesitated for a moment. "Linda Harris, please?" I asked. There was a pause, and I could hear someone crying in the background, presumably Linda. "Who's asking?" Larson's voice came through. "Her father, you piece of shit," I lied, barely containing my fury. "And don't expect to talk to her. Just tell my daughter to forget me. Leave my grandchildren, my son-in-law, and me alone. Goodbye, asshole." Less than a minute later, feeling a bit guilty, I called Linda's cell phone. She answered quickly but was still sobbing. "Hello, Linda," I said, breaking the silence. "Did you have a good day?" "John, why?" she asked. "Why did you tell my father? It could destroy him. He's been in such poor health lately. You knew that." "Hey, don't shift the blame," I said, struggling with the harsh words. "It wasn't your father on the phone with your lover, it was me. I care about your father, and your cheating would have killed him. I want to make this clear. Are you listening?" "Yes," she replied. "I'm listening. Don't ever let this guy come between me and my daughters, or your father will know everything about you. All the ugly details," I warned her. "Don't think I'm joking. I trusted you for most of my adult life. I didn't think it was possible, but you shattered that trust. I'm fighting not to just end you on sight. I have so much hatred for you right now, and it defines me at this moment. Do you understand?" "Yes," she said through her tears. "Mark, I'm so sorry. I never wanted this." "Neither did I," I said, and hung up. 6 months later, I received the official divorce papers, marking the end of my marriage. I had gotten over my bout of depression, but something still felt missing in my life. I couldn't quite figure out what it was. I tried dating a few women, but things never went far. It seemed like they could sense the emotional baggage I carried. I even had a one-night stand with a work acquaintance who was also divorced. But even that felt hollow, just 2 people seeking a quick fix for their loneliness. It left me feeling even more isolated than before. One evening, after coming home from work, a revelation struck me. Since moving into my new apartment and selling the old house to split the proceeds, I had started to name the dust bunnies collecting around the place. "Hi, Jack," I greeted, peeking out the door. I was reverting to my bachelor days, naming the dust clumps I found everywhere, mostly behind doors and under the bed. Jack was stationed by the front door, while Roger and Bugs had made a home under the bed. I almost grabbed the vacuum cleaner from the closet, feeling embarrassed at the thought that Larson would never let his place get so messy. As I curled up in the fetal position that night, I had another moment of realization. There was no clear reason for Linda's departure. It was simply because I was who I was. Can one truly struggle with their own identity? Could I just stop existing so everything could be okay? The next morning, around 10 o'clock, I answered the phone without checking the caller ID. "You son of a bitch," Linda yelled. "You shouldn't have been so rude to Emily and Sarah." For a moment, I considered hanging up, but part of me wanted to face the confrontation to end this nightmare. "What's rude, sweetie?" I asked. "Is it the months of cheating, moving in with your lover, or is it all of the above?" There was only silence, which I loathed. "Linda, some part of me still cares about you," I said. "I don't know if it's my male side, female side, or just my foolish side, but one thing I won't do is lie to our family." "You wouldn't dare," she pleaded. "Not Daddy, please." "Watch me," I said, and hung up. My finger hovered over the speed dial for Linda's father, but I didn't press it. Walter had been struggling since his wife died of breast cancer 2 years ago. He was a good man, but in his 80s, his health was fragile, and his will to live seemed weak. I could understand that today. And he was a good man. I figured it was better to let him live in peace rather than ruin his life because of his daughter's actions. My anger began to subside, so I decided to tell Linda my decision. I picked up Larson's cell phone bill and dialed the number listed. A man answered. I hesitated for a moment. "Linda Harris, please," I asked. There was a pause, and I could hear someone crying in the background, presumably Linda. "Who's asking?" Larson's voice came through. "Her father, you piece of shit," I lied, unable to suppress my anger. "And don't bother talking to her. Just tell my daughter to forget me. Leave my grandchildren, my son-in-law, and me alone. Goodbye, asshole." Less than a minute later, feeling a pang of remorse, I dialed Linda's cell number. She answered right away but was still crying. "Hello, Linda," I said, breaking the silence. "Did you have a good day?" "John, why?" she asked. "Why did you tell my father? It could destroy him. He's been in such poor health lately. You knew that." "Hey, don't shift the blame," I said, forcing myself to utter the harsh words. "It wasn't your father who was on the phone with your lover, it was me. I care about your father, and your cheating would have killed him. Let me make something clear. Are you listening?" "Yes," she said. "I'm listening. Don't let this guy come between me and my daughters, or your father will find out everything about you. All the raw details, as you put it," I warned. "Don't think I'm joking. I've trusted you for most of my adult life. I didn't think it was possible, but you shattered that trust. I'm struggling not to just end this right now. I'm filled with so much hatred for you, and that's what defines me at this moment. Do you get it?" "Yes," she said between sobs. "Mark, I'm so sorry. I never wanted this." "Neither did I," I replied, and hung up. 6 months later, I got the official divorce papers marking the end of my marriage. Although I had moved past my depression, there was still a sense of emptiness in my life. I couldn't quite pinpoint what was missing. I tried dating again, but didn't get very far. I guess the women I met could sense my emotional baggage. I had a one-night stand with a fellow work colleague who was also divorced. But even that left me feeling more alone. Sex felt meaningless without love and affection. We were just two adults seeking momentary relief, but it only deepened my sense of isolation. One evening, after coming home from work, an epiphany hit me. Since moving into my new apartment and selling the old house, I had been giving names to the dust clumps around the place. "Hi, Jack," I said, peeking out the door. I was reliving my bachelor days, naming the dust bunnies I found everywhere, especially behind doors and under the bed. Jack stood by the front door, while Roger and Bugs resided under the bed. I almost reached for the vacuum cleaner, feeling embarrassed at the thought that Larson would never let his place get this messy. I almost grabbed the vacuum cleaner from the closet, feeling embarrassed that Larson would never leave his place in such a mess. The next day, I tore off a corner of a condom wrapper and left it lying on the floor by the bed. I shook up the blankets, jumped around a bit in the middle of the bed to dishevel the sheets, and then carefully placed the blanket back in almost the same position. I also left marks from 2 glasses on the coffee table, some ashes in the toilet, and kept the ceiling fan running. I picked up a porcelain trinket, smashed it, and tossed the pieces in the trash. I grabbed a rare bottle of wine from the shelf, chose the dustiest one, opened it, poured it out, and left the empty bottle in the trash. That was my grand finale. Later that evening, my phone rang. It was Sarah, my youngest. "Daddy, you have to do something," she pleaded. "Anything for you, honey," I responded. "Help Mommy," she said, struggling to keep her voice steady. "She's at the police station. This guy hit her, and she called the police. She has nowhere to go and doesn't want to go back there anymore. He's gotten really violent lately." "Hang in there, honey," I interrupted. "I'm not the guy to help your mother. I hate her deeply and, honestly, I'm kind of enjoying what's happening to her, not the beating, but the mess she's made with her new guy." "What's going on, Daddy?" Sarah begged. "She's my mom and she needs help." Okay. "It's only because you asked," I said. "Don't expect me to do more than just pick her up and drive her somewhere." "Thanks, Dad," she said. A few minutes later, I was at the police station. Linda was still being questioned, so I had to wait. I sent her a note letting her know I was waiting. An hour later, I felt a pang of guilt when I saw Linda, her left eye swollen and black. She cried as she approached me with open arms. I struggled, but managed to keep her at arm's length. "Hey, I'm here because my daughter asked me to come," I said. "Don't think for a second that we're going to be friends. I'll give you a ride wherever you need to go, but that's all." I walked out of the police station without looking back to see if she was following. Her sobs were the only indication she was near. Once we were in the car, I asked, "Where do you want to go?" "Home," she replied. Without a word, I drove to our destination. Linda only reacted when I turned onto Larson Street and parked in front of the house. "I don't want to go there," she said, her voice trembling with tears. "Look, Larson's in jail right now. You have plenty of time to gather your things and leave." She stared at me for a moment before getting out of the car and heading to the apartment. Soon, she began hauling out trash bags filled with her clothes. She hadn't taken much when she left me, so she was done quickly. Afterward, we left. A few minutes later, she asked, "Where are we going?" Her voice was filled with apprehension. "We're going to your father's house," I told her. "You said you wanted to go home. You don't have another home." We drove in silence for a while. Her father lived far out in the suburbs. Linda broke the silence. "I didn't get a chance to apologize to you," she said. "I'm sorry for what I did. I was foolish and you caught me cheating. I admit that, but I never stopped loving you. I just forgot what that meant for a while. I didn't even want to stay with Eric, we didn't have much in common. I'm sorry for hurting you." I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. Could I have said, "It's okay"? Absolutely not. Could I tell her I forgave her? That would have been a lie, as I still resented how she had ruined our marriage. My silence, I believe, hurt her more than any grand speech could have. As we neared her father's house, Linda looked at me and asked, "What am I going to tell my father?" I was at a loss for words. What the hell? We've been divorced for months and you haven't told him? I just told him we were having trouble, Linda said. You're definitely in trouble now, I replied. Find a good reason, but don't make me the bad guy, or I'll tell him the whole truth. It was late, and I didn't offer to help Linda move her things into her father's house. For one, I was savoring her misery. For another, I didn't want to face Walter. The next day, I parked across the street from Larson's house. He got home just before noon. It was time to deliver the final blow to their affair. I grabbed the cheapest bottle of Chilean wine I had bought, a $10 investment, and headed up the stairs. Larson answered the door, surprised to see me. Hi, I said. We've never met, but I'm John Harris, Linda McKay's ex-husband. I handed him the bottle of wine. Here, take this. I'm not a freeloader. This replaces the other bottle of wine I emptied. I pulled a key from my pocket and handed it to him. Oh, and I won't be needing this either. Linda moved out last night. I smiled all the way to my car, feeling a spring in my step. Revenge can be so satisfying. I felt like I could finally move on after getting my revenge on that bitch.
I still remember the feeling. It wasn't even a big, obvious sign or some scandalous revelation. More like this slow, creeping itch that something was off. Lauren and I had been grinding together for years, building the business from the ground up, late nights, endless talks, the whole 9 yards. She'd been my partner in all of it, and I thought we were on the same page. But lately, it was like she was talking about something different. Sure, she was still present at the meetings and still had that same spark when talking numbers. But her eyes, her mind, they seemed to be somewhere else. When we signed that huge contract, the one we'd been chasing for months, I thought it would feel like the peak of everything we'd worked for. I wanted it to be our victory. We went out to celebrate, and at dinner, I couldn't help but notice Lauren's energy shift. She wasn't thrilled about the accomplishment itself. No, she was already talking about where we could take it next, about international expansion and the kind of clients that could open serious doors. She kept saying things like, "We're almost there, Zach. Just think, soon we'll be at the top, where the real players are." There was something odd in her voice, something that wasn't there before. Then we met Harry Weston. The guy was almost too cliché, a self-made millionaire with that smug, I've seen it all smile, the kind of guy who wore his wealth like it was perfume, always lingering a little too close. At first, I thought he was just another investor, someone to back our next move, but from the moment Lauren shook his hand, I could tell she saw him differently. He wasn't just money to her. He was a lifestyle. And damn if she didn't seem instantly taken with him. Harry talked about his trips, about the places he'd been, and all the influential circles he mingled in. I thought it was all fluff, some rich guy showboating, but Lauren soaked it up. I caught her laughing, her eyes practically glued to his, her smile lingering in a way I hadn't seen in ages. She had this habit of flicking her hair when she was interested. She'd done it with me back when we first started dating. It was a small thing, but there it was on full display for Harry. I shrugged it off at the time, convincing myself it was just professional admiration. I mean, we were looking to expand, right? As the days passed, though, it wasn't just Harry. Lauren started pulling away from me in ways that felt like tiny cuts. She'd be out late, claiming she was meeting with potential investors or discussing strategies. I tried asking her about it, just to gauge where we stood, but every time I mentioned Harry, she'd shut it down, saying it was purely professional. And maybe it was, but there was something cold in her eyes when she said it, like she was defending herself from an accusation that I hadn't even made yet. I noticed the change at the office, too. Julia, my assistant, who'd been with us since the early days, started picking up on Lauren's frequent private meetings, the ones that didn't seem to match up with anything on the calendar. Julia's a sharp one. She has this knack for noticing things, even when she doesn't say anything directly. One day, she dropped a hint, asking if I knew why Lauren was setting up so many off-the-record meetings. She wasn't prying, but I knew what she was getting at. I just didn't want to go there, not yet. Then came the distance at home. Lauren would come back late, sometimes reeking of a new perfume she'd never worn for me. Expensive stuff too, not the usual brands. She'd mumble something about high-profile clients, about looking the part, but I was beginning to feel like she was getting dressed up for something or someone else. Our talks turned shorter, colder. She'd brush past me, always just busy enough, always having a reason why she couldn't stay or why she couldn't talk. When I'd ask her what was up, she'd say, "You know, this business doesn't run on autopilot, Zach." I almost felt guilty for asking, like I was the one being needy. At one point, I took it to Robert. He'd been my friend for years, someone who knew me before Lauren was even in the picture. He listened quietly, the way he always did, letting me lay it all out, and finally, he looked at me with this serious expression I'll never forget. "Look, Zach," he said, "I'm not saying she's doing anything wrong, but just pay attention. People can get carried away with success. Just don't let your guard down." He didn't have to spell it out. I knew what he was saying, and so did he. Still, he had a point. Lauren could just be caught up in the thrill of it all, right? Maybe she wasn't doing anything underhanded. But even after our talk, that feeling gnawed at me. It was like an itch I couldn't scratch. Every time she left the house, every time she scheduled another meeting, I felt it more and more. I started noticing little things, small shifts in her body language, like the way she'd glance at her phone a bit too often, or the way she'd linger on certain names in conversations. Harry's mostly. And she wasn't the Lauren I knew. She was starting to feel like a stranger in our own house. And I didn't know if it was my imagination or if something had really changed. So, there I was caught in this limbo. Part of me wanted to confront her outright, to grab her phone, check her messages, and get some damn answers. But another part of me, the part that had built this business, this life with her, kept whispering to me, telling me to wait, to watch, to be smart about it. I wasn't ready to act, not yet. But I knew, deep down, that something wasn't right. And once that suspicion sets in, it's impossible to ignore. It was like someone turned a dial, slowly cranking up the volume on everything Lauren did that felt off. She started dressing up more, too much if I'm being honest. Lauren was already beautiful, and I loved that she took care of herself. But suddenly, she was buying all these expensive clothes and new perfumes, the kind I'd never seen her wear before. She'd brush it off when I asked, saying high-profile clients expect a certain look, Zach. The tone she used made it sound like she was explaining something obvious, like I was the one who didn't understand. She was staying later at work, too. Said she was caught up in evening meetings, tied down with reports and new client presentations. But it was every night now, and the excuses got thinner. Sometimes she'd be home by 10, sometimes after midnight. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But there was this nagging feeling I couldn't shake. A part of me hated that I was even having these thoughts about her. But I couldn't ignore it, especially with how fast her wardrobe was transforming, how often she'd leave the house with that new perfume lingering in the air. Then came the day Julia, my assistant, mentioned that Lauren had left her work laptop open. Julia didn't push me. She just let it sit there, a casual remark dropped like a bomb. I wrestled with myself for a minute, thinking maybe I was overstepping, but in the end, curiosity got the better of me. When I opened the laptop, I saw emails between her and Harry. They weren't exactly scandalous, not on the surface. But there were these strange hints, little phrases here and there that stuck out like a sore thumb. Things about meetings outside of business hours, with vague mentions of where they go like the usual spot. It was enough to make my blood boil, but not enough to confront her outright. A few days later, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to see for myself if I was just imagining things. I knew she had a meeting near one of our usual lunch spots, so I decided to drop by, pretending I was just passing through. And there they were, her and Harry sitting in the far corner, looking way too comfortable. They were laughing, leaning in close. I could see that damn flick of her hair, that way she'd always toss it back when she was interested, when she wanted attention. Lauren saw me first, and her face went through a whole range of emotions, surprise, guilt, then something that looked almost like irritation. She waved me over, forcing a smile as she introduced me to Harry, who had this annoyingly calm look on his face. "Hey, Zach," she said, putting on that practiced, professional tone. Harry and I were just going over some client strategies. She emphasized client strategies like I'd somehow misunderstood her. I played along, shook Harry's hand, and tried to act natural. But inside, I was seething. There was no reason for her to look that cozy with him. No client strategy required her to laugh that hard at his stupid jokes. I wanted to call her out right there, but I wasn't ready. Not yet. I needed more than just a gut feeling and an awkward lunch meeting to go on. After that encounter, I knew I had to get more insight. Lauren had this close friend, Sarah, someone she trusted with just about everything. I figured Sarah would know if something was up, or at least if Lauren had been saying anything unusual. So, I reached out casual-like, under the pretense of checking in. I hinted around, asking if Lauren seemed any different lately. Sarah hesitated, but finally, she gave me a look that made my stomach drop. "Well, Zach," she said, choosing her words carefully. "Lauren's been talking about wanting more out of life, you know? She said she feels like she's missing out on something, like she needs to live a real life, whatever that means." She paused, her voice quieter now. She's been talking a lot about the people she's been meeting lately, especially people like Harry. She says he understands her ambitions. That was it for me. Sarah didn't say it outright, but she didn't have to. It was clear Lauren was seeing Harry as more than just a business contact. I thanked Sarah, trying to keep my cool, and went home that night with a fire in my gut. It was one thing to suspect, but now I had confirmation from the way Lauren was talking to her friends. She was looking for a life I wasn't part of, a life that Harry, apparently, was all too eager to provide. That night, Lauren came home late again. She was tense, clearly annoyed about something, slamming her bag on the counter before taking off her shoes with more force than necessary. I could see she was itching to start a fight, and sure enough, she didn't waste any time. "Do you even care about my career, Zach?" she snapped, barely looking at me. "I feel like you don't understand what I need to do to succeed. You just want to stay comfortable, but I need more." "More?" I repeated, barely holding back. "What exactly do you need, Lauren? More meetings with Harry? More late nights?" She rolled her eyes, like I was some clueless child. "Oh, don't start with that," she said, exasperated. "It's just business. Not everything is about you, Zach. You think I'm doing all this for fun?" I wanted to scream at her, to demand the truth, but instead, I tried to keep my voice steady. "Are you sure it's all just business? Because it doesn't look that way, Lauren. You're out late every night, spending a fortune on clothes and perfume you didn't used to care about. If it's not about you, then what is it about?" She laughed, a bitter, humorless laugh. "Unbelievable. You really think I'm that shallow? I'm doing this for us, Zach. For our future. Maybe if you actually supported me instead of throwing around baseless accusations, you'd understand that." Our argument escalated, words flying back and forth until she finally stormed off to the bedroom, leaving me alone, seething. I could feel that wall between us, the one that had been building for weeks, maybe months. And after that night, I knew I couldn't trust her words anymore. She'd said everything she needed to say with her actions, with her dismissive tone, with her complete unwillingness to acknowledge the possibility that I might have a reason to worry. As I sat there, I felt like the fool, the guy who'd built a business with his wife, thinking we'd be partners in life and work. But now I could barely recognize her. And as much as I wanted to believe she was just wrapped up in the thrill of our success, deep down, I knew better. This wasn't about business. It was about her, about some need she had that went beyond anything we'd built together. I wasn't ready to call it quits, not yet. But I wasn't going to sit back and watch her tear apart everything we'd built either. I don't know what possessed her to leave her phone on the kitchen counter that night. Maybe she was getting careless, or maybe she just thought I was too naive, too trusting to ever check it. Either way, there it was, buzzing on the counter with that familiar tone, announcing a new message. I'd heard it 1,000 times before, but this time, something in me snapped. I needed to know. I grabbed the phone and glanced at the screen. It was from Harry. The message was short but to the point, saying something about how he enjoyed their last meeting at the hotel and how he was already looking forward to the next one. My hand went cold. Here it was, the confirmation of everything I'd been suspecting but hoping wasn't true. She'd left the phone unlocked, and I scrolled back through their messages, finding more than I wanted to see. Messages about catching up, hints at private dinners, and words I hadn't heard from her in a long time. I wanted to confront her then and there, but I knew it wouldn't be enough. She'd find a way to explain it, to brush it off as networking or some crap about important client relations. No, I needed more, something undeniable, and I knew just the person to help me. The next day, I pulled Julia aside. She'd been my assistant since the early days, and if there was anyone I could trust, it was her. I laid it all out for her, the late nights, the lunches with Harry, the message I'd found. She wasn't surprised. She'd noticed the shift in Lauren's behavior, too. Julia offered to keep an eye on things, subtly monitor Lauren's work activities, and check her email whenever possible. She even noticed that Lauren had been receiving tickets to expensive events, ones I hadn't heard a thing about. With Julia's help, I started piecing together a clearer picture of what was going on. I knew Lauren was careful, but she wasn't as slick as she thought. Her private meetings were becoming a regular occurrence, and the tickets she was receiving? They were for high-end events I'd never heard of, events that Harry seemed to attend as well. It was starting to feel like a sick game, with me on the outside, watching her flaunt this life that had nothing to do with us, with our goals, our work, our future. But it wasn't enough. I needed hard evidence, something undeniable, something that would give me leverage to end this whole charade. That's when I reached out to a private investigator, someone Robert had mentioned once. He didn't ask too many questions, just nodded and took the information I gave him. He started tailing Lauren over the next few weeks, tracking her to high-end restaurants, private parties, and, sure enough, hotel after hotel. Each time, Harry was there, laughing, leaning in, playing the part. When the photos came back, I could feel my stomach twist. There she was, dressed to the nines, looking happier than she had in years, wrapped around a man who wasn't me. They weren't trying to hide it, either. In some of the photos, you could see them holding hands, leaning close, sharing looks that I hadn't seen on her face in well too long. Finally, I had enough. I wasn't just going to stand by and watch her continue this double life while playing the role of the devoted wife. So that night, when she walked through the door, I told her we needed to talk. She looked at me, eyes narrowing slightly, like she was trying to gauge whether I knew anything. "What's this about, Zach?" she asked, trying to sound casual, but I could see the tension in her jaw. "I know about you and Harry," I said, as flatly as I could, my voice calm but hard. I wasn't going to give her an inch to maneuver. "I know about the hotels, the meetings, the messages. I've seen the photos, Lauren. Don't even try lying." Her face paled, then turned red. She opened her mouth, probably to deny it, but something in my expression must have told her there was no point. She let out a breath, crossing her arms and meeting my gaze defiantly. "And so what if I did?" she said, her voice cool and dismissive. "Can you really blame me? I've been stuck in this small, predictable life for years, Zach. You think a few business contracts and a cozy office are all I wanted?" Her words hit me like a punch to the gut, but I kept my composure. "I thought we built something together, Lauren. I thought this was about us, not about your real-life fantasy with some guy who just happens to have a fat bank account." She laughed bitterly, shaking her head. "You don't get it, do you? It's not just about money. It's about lifestyle, about being with people who understand ambition. Harry does, and he's everything you're not. Connected, influential, able to provide a life beyond this small-time setup." I don't know what I'd expected her to say, but hearing her actually justify it with this disdain for everything we'd built, for everything I thought we shared, it set something off in me. I'd worked myself to the bone for this business, poured my life into it, and now she was just moving on, like it was nothing? I felt the anger hardening inside, turning into something cold and calculated. I wasn't going to let her walk away from all of this without consequences. After she'd said her piece, she stormed out of the room, leaving me standing there, the full weight of her betrayal settling over me. I was done playing nice. If this was the life she wanted, if she was so eager to turn her back on everything we'd built, then she could have it. But it was going to cost her. The next day, I went straight to Robert. I told him everything. Her affair with Harry, the contempt she'd shown for the life we'd built, and my plan to make sure she didn't walk away from this unscathed. Robert was all in. He'd never liked Harry, and was more than happy to help me dismantle whatever future she thought she had lined up. We spent hours talking, strategizing, working out the legal side, finding ways to remove her from the company, to make sure she left with as little as possible. We met with a lawyer who knew how to work the system. Step by step, we began building a case that would legally bind Lauren's assets, cutting her out from the company, from our finances, from everything she thought she had in her grasp. I could feel the anger fueling me, giving me a strange kind of energy like a fire that kept burning, pushing me forward. Now, I had the evidence. I had allies. And soon, I'd have a plan that would make sure Lauren regretted every moment she'd spent with Harry. There was no turning back now. I was ready to watch her world unravel, piece by piece, just like she'd done to mine. When Robert introduced me to Jeff Carter, I knew I was about to step into a new arena, one where Lauren wouldn't be able to manipulate her way out. Jeff was exactly what I needed, a lawyer who knew how to play the game without blinking, someone who could protect me from any angle Lauren might try to exploit. We sat in his office, and as I explained the situation, Jeff listened carefully, nodding along, his eyes sharpening with interest. Once I finished, he leaned back, a slight smirk tugging at his mouth. "Well, Zach," he said, "if you want to go after everything she's trying to steal, we can make this airtight. I'll make sure she can't touch a cent of the company. And as for the divorce, she'll walk away with as little as possible. But this has to be done carefully." So we got to work. Following Jeff's advice, I began moving assets around, shifting funds into separate accounts that Lauren couldn't reach. We crafted a series of shell companies, each account layered with a level of legal protection that would be impossible to crack without my permission. Each step felt like building a fortress, and every bit of money moved was another layer between me and whatever damage Lauren might try to inflict. One of the most crucial steps was putting part of the company under my sister Lily's name. Lily had her own career, far outside of this industry, and didn't owe Lauren any loyalty. She was outraged when I told her the whole story and agreed without a second thought. By giving her partial ownership of the company, I was safeguarding what Lauren thought was hers. Even if she tried to take me to court, she wouldn't be able to lay a finger on it. The company would be out of her reach. While this was all happening, something else started brewing. My relationship with Eve. Eve had been friends with Lauren for years, but she wasn't blind. She saw what was happening and didn't have an ounce of sympathy left for her so-called friend. She'd always felt overshadowed by Lauren, and now that Lauren had burned every bridge, Eve was more than happy to help. She was invaluable, providing me with insights I never would have had. She knew the real Lauren, the person behind the facade, and each time she shared some piece of information, she helped me see the depths of Lauren's betrayal more clearly. As our plan unfolded, Eve and I started spending more time together, and somewhere along the way, our connection took on a life of its own. It wasn't something we planned, but it felt inevitable, like we'd been drawn together by everything Lauren had done. Eve wanted justice, and so did I, but with her, it was more than that. She was loyal in a way Lauren never had been. And as the lines between ally and something more began to blur, I realized how much I valued having her by my side. And if I'm honest, seeing Lauren's closest friend stand beside me, ready to expose her, was a kind of revenge in itself. The next big move was the investors. Together with Robert and Eve, I organized a meeting with the most influential people backing our company. They were loyal, but had seen the unsettling shift Lauren's relationship with Harry had created. We called them in, acting as if it were a regular quarterly check-in, just a routine discussion about the company's future. But when they arrived, I presented them with everything Lauren and Harry had been doing. I showed them the documents, the records of extravagant expenses, the tickets to events neither Robert nor I had approved. The investors sat there, stunned, watching as I went through every cent Lauren and Harry had drained for their own private escapades. I could see the disgust on their faces, the disbelief as they realized how far Lauren had gone. By the end of the meeting, any loyalty they might have had to her was gone. They backed me fully, signing off on measures to ensure that I maintained control of the company, that no future business decisions made by Lauren or Harry could affect the direction of our work. With the company secured, I set my sights on Harry. The guy had his fingers in plenty of pies, investing in other ventures, always angling for the next big thing. He liked to present himself as a big deal, someone everyone wanted to work with. But after what he'd done, I was more than happy to watch that reputation unravel. I started reaching out to his business partners, quietly slipping them information about his behavior, how he'd misused funds, manipulated resources for personal gain. The backlash was almost immediate. One by one, companies began pulling out of deals, distancing themselves from his brand. It didn't take long for word to get around that Harry wasn't someone to be trusted. I heard through the grapevine that he was trying to salvage his reputation, scrambling to keep his clients on board. It was satisfying, knowing that he'd have to face the consequences of the empire he thought he'd built. Lauren, meanwhile, was oblivious to all of this. She was still under the delusion that her affair was a private, personal matter, that I'd sit back and let her walk away unscathed. She had no idea I'd moved most of the company out of her reach, or that her closest friend was now my ally. She didn't see the walls closing in on her, the damage already taking place behind the scenes. And with each step of the plan, I felt the weight of her betrayal lifting, replaced by a sense of control, of purpose. By the time we reached the final stage, I had everything I needed. The assets were secured, the investors were on my side, and Harry's reputation was in shambles. Lauren and Harry thought they were untouchable, that they could live out their fantasy without consequence. But they'd miscalculated, blinded by their own egos. The big day had finally arrived. Everything had been meticulously set up. The invitations, the agenda, the catering. It looked like a typical business meeting, maybe a bit more formal, but nothing that would raise suspicion. Lauren and Harry were both in attendance, unsuspecting, believing they were there to showcase another new phase in the company's growth. I watched them laugh and chat with clients, completely oblivious to the fact that this grand presentation was about to shatter everything they'd worked to build behind my back. When everyone was settled, I took the stage, the familiar faces of our investors, partners, and clients looking back at me. I started off as I normally would, a practice speech about our company values, about our mission to grow with integrity and build lasting relationships. But soon my tone changed. I saw a few people exchange glances as my words sharpened, becoming pointed. Unfortunately, integrity isn't something everyone in this room has upheld, I said, scanning the audience as I felt the tension rising. I could see the confusion beginning to spread, Lauren glancing around nervously, wondering where this was going. I let the pause linger before continuing. Recently, I've come across some disturbing revelations about betrayal within our team, I said, my gaze finally landing on Lauren. I saw her eyes widen, a flicker of realization hitting her. Next to her, Harry shifted uncomfortably, his smug confidence beginning to drain away. I clicked a button on my remote, and a screen behind me lit up with financial statements and bank records, all highlighting the money funnel from the company into business expenses that had nothing to do with business. I watched their expressions, the shock and horror growing as the room took in the details. The luxury dinners, high-end events, and private hotel stays, all paid for with our hard-earned funds. I trusted these individuals. I continued, my voice steady but seething. I believed in them as partners, as leaders within our organization. But it appears I was wrong. These funds weren't used for the growth of our company. They were used for personal indulgences, by people who thought they were above accountability. I flipped to the next slide. Photos of Lauren and Harry together at the events, walking hand in hand, laughing over dinner, cozying up at private gatherings. Gasps echoed through the room, and Lauren's face turned beet red. I watched her eyes dart to the exits, as if she could somehow disappear, make this whole thing go away. Harry tried to keep his composure, but I saw the desperation setting in. He stood up abruptly, trying to say something, stammering out, This is all a misunderstanding, but the investors weren't buying it. One by one, they looked at him with disgust, some shaking their heads, some leaving their seats, their faces etched with betrayal. You call this a misunderstanding? I asked, my voice echoing through the silence. It's a betrayal, not only of our business, but of every single person in this room who trusted you. More evidence rolled on the screen, a damning sequence of screenshots, messages exchanged between them detailing their plans, jokes about living the good life. I watched Lauren's expression crumble as each message was exposed, her perfect facade cracking with every line that appeared. The room erupted in chaos. People were muttering, some were leaving, and others were glaring daggers at Lauren and Harry. I watched Lauren's eyes dart to Harry, but he wasn't looking at her. He was staring straight ahead, mouth clenched, his face an odd shade of white. He tried one last time to salvage the situation, standing up and saying, "Look, this was all exaggerated. We didn't do anything illegal." But no one was listening. Investors were walking out, shaking their heads. I watched as Harry finally gave up, grabbing his coat and making a beeline for the exit without even glancing at Lauren. He'd abandoned her the moment things went south, effectively ending their so-called partnership and leaving her to face the wreckage alone. Lauren, still in shock, tried to save face, stammering something about a miscommunication and work-related outings, but the crowd wasn't buying it. Her voice faltered, and the helpless look in her eyes betrayed just how deeply this was sinking in. For the first time, she saw the fallout of her actions, and it was a brutal, public unraveling. Once the room had quieted down, I took the mic one last time. Effective immediately, I said, "Lauren and Harry are no longer associated with this company. With the support of our legal team and the approval of our investors, they will be removed from any involvement in our operations." Robert stood beside me, his face set with quiet satisfaction. We had ensured that Lauren wouldn't just lose her position here. She would be left with nothing. Everything she'd worked for, all the schemes she'd planned with Harry, were in ruins. By the time the meeting ended, Lauren was left standing alone, the last traces of her confident, scheming self completely shattered. She looked around, desperate for a lifeline, but every friendly face had turned away. In that moment, she realized she had lost it all: her reputation, her career, the company, and any hope of salvaging the dream she'd traded me in for. I watched her walk out of the building, shoulders slumped, looking as defeated as she'd made me feel all those months ago. The weeks following that meeting were a whirlwind. With the public humiliation fresh in everyone's minds, the next step was clear. I filed for divorce, and with Jeff's legal expertise, we made sure it was airtight. Everything we'd planned, the assets shifted to my sister Lily's name, the company funds carefully moved into accounts Lauren couldn't touch, made it a clean and decisive process. She had no claim to anything we'd built. I'd safeguarded it all, right down to the last dollar. Lauren didn't fight it, at least not publicly. By the time the papers were signed, her life was already spiraling. The affair had left her with debts she and Harry had racked up during their little fantasy. She counted on being able to pull funds from the company to cover them. But with everything locked down, those expenses were now solely her responsibility. Jeff handled every detail, ensuring that not a single asset could slip through, leaving her stranded. After the scandal, people in our circle began to distance themselves from her. Sarah, once her closest friend, turned her back on Lauren, realizing just how deep the betrayal had gone. Former colleagues stopped taking her calls. She became a liability, a mark of shame among people who once respected her. I started hearing whispers through the grapevine about how desperate she was, how her reputation had been utterly shattered. Nobody was willing to risk their own standing by associating with her. Eve, on the other hand, became a cornerstone in my life. After all the deceit and betrayal, her loyalty was a breath of fresh air. Our connection grew, evolving into something deep and steady. She stood beside me, not just as a romantic partner, but as someone I could trust, someone who had proven her loyalty in ways I hadn't thought possible. She became involved in the business, offering advice, helping me strategize, and eventually suggesting we invest together in a new venture. She had a sharp mind, and her ideas brought energy back into the work I thought I'd lost interest in. With the backing of Robert and a few loyal former partners, I launched a new business. We focused on innovative financial consulting, adapting to changes in the market and filling gaps that others had overlooked. The response was beyond what I'd expected. Clients who respected my ethics and business savvy flocked to us, and within months, we were gaining momentum, far exceeding what I'd ever hoped for. The best part? This time, I didn't have to worry about hidden agendas or trust issues. Meanwhile, Harry's downfall was swift and brutal. Word spread quickly about his involvement in the scandal, about the unethical practices he'd engaged in to maintain the lifestyle he thought he deserved. As partners and investors deserted him, he struggled to keep afloat. He was forced to sell assets, liquidate holdings, and eventually, he faded out of the business world entirely. For a man who had built his life on appearances, losing his standing was a fate worse than losing money. And then there was Lauren. With debts piling up and her reputation in ruins, she struggled to find any stable footing. She'd once been respected, seen as a powerful woman in her field, but now she was left with nothing but low-level jobs that barely covered her bills. The field she'd once dominated now saw her as a liability, and any hope she had of rebuilding her career were crushed under the weight of her choices. She'd risked everything for that brief taste of luxury with Harry, and now she was paying the price, starting from scratch, just like the rest of us when we first began. Only this time, she had no allies left. As for me, the future had never felt so open. I was free, finally unburdened by the weight of deception and betrayal. My relationship with Eve flourished in ways I hadn't expected. She wasn't just my partner. She was someone who truly had my back, someone I could rely on without a hint of doubt. Every day felt like a fresh start, a new chance to live without the shadows of the past. Reflecting on it all, I felt lighter, as if I'd shed years of weight I didn't even know I'd been carrying. The business was thriving. My personal life was steady, and the scars from the ordeal had transformed into a kind of strength, a clarity I hadn't had before. I'd survived betrayal, heartache, and the attempts to strip me of everything I'd built. And in the end, I'd come out on top, surrounded by people I could trust. Lauren's story, however, was different. She was out there, picking up the pieces of a life she'd shattered, faced with the reality that she'd traded stability and love for a dream that had been nothing but smoke and mirrors. She'd lost it all, and she'd have to live with that knowledge, with the loneliness and regret. But I was finally looking forward, unburdened, my path clear, leaving the past exactly where it belonged, behind me.
Subscribe to Cheating Tales Lab for more original and exclusive stories. We hope you enjoy this one. Let's begin. Ethan Blackwood's fingers drummed an impatient rhythm on the steering wheel of his Audi R8 as he navigated the congested downtown streets. The sleek sports car, usually a source of pride, felt like a gilded cage in the stop-and-go traffic. His mind raced, consumed by the forgotten wallet that threatened to derail his $1 million proposal presentation. "Damn it," he muttered, glancing at his empty breast pocket for the 100th time. The thought of asking Victoria to bring it down to his office made him wince. He could already hear her sardonic comments about his absent-mindedness. With a sudden jerk of the wheel, Ethan cut across 2 lanes of honking traffic, ignoring the chorus of blaring horns. He'd grab the wallet himself and be back on the road in 10 minutes. No need to give Victoria more ammunition for her little jabs. As he pulled into the private parking area of his luxurious penthouse, Ethan's eyes narrowed at the unfamiliar Porsche 911 parked haphazardly nearby. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up as he approached their door, an unsettling silence greeting him as he entered. "Victoria," he called out, his voice echoing in the vast open-plan living area. No response. The muffled sounds coming from the master bedroom sent a chill down his spine. Ethan's hand hesitated on the doorknob for a split second before he pushed it open. The sight that greeted him sent his world spinning off its axis. A shirtless man, tall and muscular, stood by the bed, carelessly buttoning his pants. His dark hair was mussed, his chiseled features twisted in surprise, and something that looked unsettlingly like amusement. Rage exploded in Ethan's chest. He lunged forward, grabbing the stranger by the collar. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded, his voice trembling with fury. Before the man could answer, a flash of silk caught Ethan's peripheral vision. Victoria rushed out of the ensuite bathroom, cinching a robe around her waist. Her face cycled through shock, defiance, and finally settled on a look of cold detachment that chilled Ethan to his core. "Let him go, Ethan," she said, her voice steady and devoid of any guilt or shame. "This is Xavier Thornton, my new love." Ethan's grip on Xavier's collar loosened, more from shock than compliance. He stumbled back a step, his mind reeling as he tried to process the surreal scene before him. "What was I to you for 13 years, Victoria?" The words tumbled out before he could stop them, raw and vulnerable. Victoria's lips curled into a cruel smile that Ethan had never seen before. It transformed her beautiful face into something alien and malevolent. "A tool, Ethan," she replied, her voice dripping with disdain. "Just a surviving tool. Xavier here is everything you're not, passionate, spontaneous, and exciting." Each word was a dagger, precisely aimed to inflict maximum pain. Ethan felt his chest constrict, struggling to draw breath as the full weight of her betrayal crashed down upon him. Fury coursing through his veins, Ethan ordered them both out of his house. As Victoria gathered her things, she hissed, "I'll make sure you regret this decision, Ethan. You have no idea what I'm capable of." The threat hung in the air as Victoria and Xavier left, the sound of the Porsche's engine fading into the distance. Ethan stood alone in the bedroom, his world shattered around him. The following days passed in a blur for Ethan. He moved through the prestigious architecture firm like a ghost, going through the motions but feeling utterly disconnected. Every sympathetic glance, every hushed conversation that stopped abruptly when he entered a room, felt like salt in his still raw wounds. It was during a particularly grueling meeting that Marcus Steele, Ethan's colleague and best friend at the firm, finally confronted him. As the other partners filed out of the conference room, Marcus hung back, concern etched deep in the lines of his face. "Ethan, what's going on with you, man?" Marcus asked, his voice low and urgent. "You've been off your game all week. That proposal you presented just now, it's not up to your usual standards. Talk to me." Ethan looked up at his friend, seeing the genuine worry in his eyes. The weight of his secret was crushing him, and Marcus's concern finally cracked his resolve. "It's Victoria," Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper. She's been cheating on me. I walked in on them, Marcus, in our bed." Marcus's eyes widened in shock, then narrowed in anger. "Jesus, Ethan, I'm so sorry. What are you going to do?" As Ethan confided in Marcus, detailing Victoria's threats and his fears, neither man noticed the intern hovering nearby, her eyes wide with interest. By the end of the day, the entire firm would be buzzing with whispers about Ethan Blackwood's scandalous divorce. Meanwhile, Victoria and Xavier began their campaign of harassment against Ethan. They spread malicious rumors in their social circle, claiming Ethan was abusive and controlling. Victoria reached out to Ethan's clients, attempting to tarnish his professional reputation with false accusations. The attacks came from all sides, leaving Ethan reeling. His phone buzzed constantly with messages from concerned friends and colleagues, asking about the rumors. Clients called, demanding explanations for accusations they'd heard. Ethan found himself constantly on the defensive, struggling to maintain his composure and his reputation. As the pressure mounted, Ethan felt increasingly cornered and desperate. The final straw came when he received a call from his bank. Victoria had drained their joint accounts, leaving him nearly penniless. This last betrayal ignited a fierce desire for revenge within Ethan. He realized that playing defense wasn't enough. He needed to fight back. With renewed determination, Ethan reached out to his old college friend, Olivia Chun, now a private investigator. They met at a quiet cafe, away from prying eyes. "Olivia, I need your help," Ethan said, his voice low and urgent. "I need you to dig into Victoria and Xavier's backgrounds. There has to be something I can use against them." Olivia studied him carefully, noting the dark circles under his eyes and the tension in his jaw. "This isn't like you, Ethan." Ethan's eyes hardened. "They've left me no choice, Liv. Victoria's trying to destroy everything I've built. I need to protect myself." Olivia nodded slowly. "All right, I'll see what I can find. But Ethan, be careful. Revenge can be a double-edged sword." As Olivia began her investigation, Ethan felt a glimmer of hope for the first time since his world had imploded. He didn't know what Olivia would uncover, but he was certain of one thing. He wouldn't go down without a fight. The spark of revenge had been ignited, and Ethan was ready to fan it into a roaring flame. Olivia Chen sat in her dimly lit office, surrounded by stacks of files and the soft glow of multiple computer screens. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, eyes darting between documents as she pieced together the puzzle of Victoria Blackwood and Xavier Thornton's lives. The deeper she dug, the more her brow furrowed. This was no simple case of infidelity. It was a tangled web of deceit that stretched back years. Her phone buzzed. Ethan's name flashed on the screen. "What have you found?" His voice was taut with barely contained tension. Olivia leaned back in her chair, rubbing her eyes. "You might want to sit down for this, Ethan. It's not good." She heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "Just tell me, Liv." "All right," she said, pulling up a series of documents on her main screen. "Let's start with your wife's lover. Xavier Thornton? That's not his real name. He's actually Xavier Reeves, a known con artist. He's got a history of seducing wealthy women and swindling them out of their money. He's been operating under the radar for years, always managing to stay one step ahead of the law." Ethan's silence was deafening. Olivia continued, her voice softening slightly. "And Victoria, I'm sorry, Ethan, but she's not who you thought she was either. I've uncovered a pattern of infidelity going back at least 5 years. But that's not the worst of it. She's been involved in several fraudulent business dealings. Shell companies, embezzlement, the works." "Jesus Christ," Ethan muttered. How? How did I not see any of this?" Olivia's heart ached for her friend. "These people are professionals, Ethan. They're experts at hiding their tracks. But now we know, and that gives us an advantage." There was a long pause before Ethan spoke again, his voice hardening with resolve. "You're right. Knowledge is power. Send me everything you've got. It's time to fight back." As Olivia compiled her findings into a secure file, her mind raced with the implications. This wasn't just about helping a friend anymore. They were dealing with dangerous criminals. She made a mental note to beef up her own security measures. If Victoria and Xavier got wind of her investigation, things could get ugly fast. Across town, Ethan sat in his sparsely furnished apartment, staring at the laptop screen as Olivia's report populated with document after damning document. Each new revelation felt like a physical blow, but with each hit, his resolve strengthened. He reached for his phone, scrolling through his contacts until he found the name he was looking for. Liam Blackwood, his tech-savvy cousin. If anyone could help him gather the electronic evidence needed to bring Victoria and Xavier down, it was Liam. The phone rang twice before a cheerful voice answered. "Ethan, long time no hear, cuz." "What's up?" Ethan's grip tightened on the phone. "Liam, I need your help. It's bad. Really bad." The cheerfulness drained from Liam's voice, replaced by concern. "What's going on, Ethan? I can't explain everything over the phone. Can you come over? And bring your gear. We've got some digital digging to do." There was a pause. Then Liam's voice came back, firm and determined. "I'm on my way. Hang tight, cuz. Whatever this is, we'll figure it out together." As Ethan ended the call, he felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in weeks. With Olivia's investigative skills and Liam's technical expertise, they had a fighting chance. Victoria and Xavier had no idea what was coming for them. He turned back to the laptop, steeling himself to dive deeper into the sordid details of his wife's double life. Each revelation stoked the fire of his determination. They wanted to play dirty? Fine. He'd show them just how dirty he could get. The following weeks saw Ethan Blackwood undergo a transformation to the outside world. He appeared a broken man, stumbling through his days in a haze of despair. His colleagues at the architecture firm whispered behind his back, their faces etched with a mixture of pity and morbid fascination. But behind closed doors, a different Ethan emerged. With Liam hunched over multiple laptops and Olivia poring over stacks of documents, Ethan's apartment had become a war room. The walls were covered with timelines, connections, and strategies, all aimed at one goal: bringing Victoria and Xavier to justice. We need to lure them into a false sense of security, Ethan mused, pacing the length of the living room. Make them think they've won completely. Liam looked up from his screen, eyebrows raised. You sure about that, cuz? It's gonna mean taking some hits to your reputation. Ethan's jaw clenched. My reputation's already in tatters thanks to their smear campaign. At least this way, it serves a purpose. Olivia nodded approvingly. It's a smart play. If they think you're defeated, they might get sloppy, make mistakes. And so, Operation Broken Man began. Ethan started showing up to work disheveled, his eyes red-rimmed as if from crying or drinking. He fumbled presentations, missed deadlines, and generally gave the impression of a man on the verge of a complete breakdown. The whispers in the office grew louder. Poor Ethan, they'd say. He's really lost it since Victoria left him. Meanwhile, Victoria and Xavier reveled in their apparent victory. They were spotted at high-end restaurants, luxury boutiques, and exclusive clubs, spending Ethan's money with reckless abandon. Their laughter echoed through the social circles they once shared with Ethan, each public appearance another twist of the knife. But Ethan wasn't as broken as he appeared. Every night he, Liam, and Olivia worked tirelessly, building their case piece by piece. Liam's technical wizardry uncovered a trail of digital breadcrumbs linking Victoria and Xavier to their fraudulent activities. Olivia's network of contacts provided crucial pieces of the puzzle, filling in gaps and corroborating evidence. As their case grew stronger, Ethan realized they needed more. Victims' testimonies could be the nail in the coffin for Victoria and Xavier's operations. With Olivia's help, he began reaching out to those who had fallen prey to the duo's schemes. One name stood out: Sofia Alvarez, Victoria's former business partner. Ethan remembered her vaguely from cocktail parties and charity events, always standing slightly apart from the crowd, her eyes sharp and assessing. He'd always assumed she and Victoria had simply had a falling out. Now, he suspected there was much more to the story. Arranging a meeting with Sofia proved challenging. She was understandably wary, having been burned by Victoria before. But Ethan's persistence paid off, and she finally agreed to meet him at a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town. Sofia arrived precisely on time, her posture rigid and her eyes guarded. She slid into the booth across from Ethan, studying him carefully. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice cool and measured. "I must admit, I was surprised to hear from you. What exactly is it you want from me?" Ethan leaned forward, his voice low and urgent. "The truth, Ms. Alvarez. About Victoria. About what really happened between you two." Sofia's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of pain crossing her face before she schooled her features back into neutrality. "And why should I dredge up ancient history? What's done is done." "Because it's not ancient history," Ethan replied, sliding a folder across the table. "It's happening again. Victoria and her new partner, Xavier, are running the same schemes. They've already hurt people. They'll keep hurting people unless we stop them." Sofia's hand trembled slightly as she opened the folder, her eyes scanning the documents within. With each page she turned, her composure cracked a little more. Finally, she looked up at Ethan, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I always wondered if I was the only one," she whispered. "If I was just weak, stupid." Ethan reached across the table, gently squeezing her hand. "You weren't weak or stupid, Sofia. You were a victim. But now, you have the power to make sure there are no more victims. Will you help us?" Sofia took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. When she met Ethan's gaze again, there was steel in her eyes. "Tell me what you need me to do." As Ethan left the cafe, Sofia's agreement to testify secure, he felt a surge of triumph. The trap was set. Now, it was time to spring it. The early morning stillness was shattered by the insistent buzzing of a phone. Special Agent Sarah Donovan fumbled for her cell, squinting at the bright screen. An anonymous tip. Another dead end, probably, but in her line of work, you never knew when a seemingly insignificant lead might crack a case wide open. As she listened to the distorted voice on the other end of the line, her eyes widened. Names, dates, account numbers. Whoever this was, they had serious intel. By the time the call ended, Sarah was wide awake, her mind racing with possibilities. "Johnson," she barked, striding into the office an hour later. "I need everything we got on a Xavier Reeves, a.k.a. Xavier Thornton, and get me a liaison at the SEC. We might have a big one on our hands." Across town, Ethan Blackwood sat in his car, heart pounding as he ended the call. The burner phone felt heavy in his hand as he tossed it into the passenger seat. There was no going back now. He had just set in motion a chain of events that would either save him or destroy him completely. His phone buzzed his real phone this time. A message from Liam. Package delivered to SEC. Ball's in their court now. Ethan allowed himself a smile. Victoria and Xavier had no idea what was about to hit them. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. FBI agents combed through financial records, following the trail of breadcrumbs Ethan and his team had carefully laid out. SEC investigators pored over Victoria's business dealings, uncovering layers of fraud and deceit. Victoria, meanwhile, was beginning to sense that something was amiss. Her carefully crafted world was showing cracks, and she didn't like it one bit. She paced her luxury apartment, phone pressed to her ear. "I don't care what it takes," she hissed into the receiver. "Find out who's been digging into our affairs and shut them down. Now." But it was too late. The walls were already closing in, and Victoria's desperate attempts to plug the leaks only served to draw more attention to her activities. As the pressure mounted, Victoria made a fatal mistake. In a moment of panic, she attempted to blackmail Ethan with fabricated evidence of misconduct. It was a desperate ploy, a last-ditch effort to regain control of the situation. What Victoria didn't know was that Liam had been working tirelessly to secure Ethan's digital footprint. Every email, every text message, every financial transaction, all of it was backed up and verified. Her clumsy attempt at blackmail fell flat, serving only to add another charge to the growing list of her crimes. Ethan received Victoria's blackmail attempt with a mixture of anger and satisfaction. Anger at her audacity, at the depths of her betrayal, but satisfaction, too, because this was the final piece of the puzzle. With this, they had her dead to rights. He forwarded the blackmail attempt to Agent Donovan, along with Liam's evidence proving its fabrication. Then, he sat back and waited for the hammer to fall. He didn't have to wait long. The next morning, as Ethan sipped his coffee and pretended to review blueprints at work, all hell broke loose. News alerts began popping up on his phone. Prominent businesswoman Victoria Blackwood implicated in massive fraud scheme. Con artist Xavier Reeves, a.k.a. Thornton, wanted by FBI. SEC launches investigation into Blackwood Enterprises. Ethan's colleagues gathered around the break room TV, watching in shock as Victoria's face flashed across the screen, followed by Xavier's. The newscaster's voice was hard as she detailed the charges. Fraud, embezzlement, money laundering, and more. Marcus appeared at Ethan's side, his face a mask of concern. "Ethan, man, did you know about any of this?" Ethan allowed his mask to slip just a little. He let Marcus see a glimpse of the pain, the anger, the satisfaction. "I had my suspicions," he said quietly, "but I never imagined it went this deep." As his co-workers buzzed with shock and speculation, Ethan slipped away to the restroom. He locked himself in a stall, took a deep breath, and allowed himself a moment of pure, unadulterated triumph. They'd done it. The trap had sprung, and Victoria and Xavier were caught right in the middle of it. But Ethan knew better than to celebrate too early. This was just the beginning. Victoria and Xavier were cornered animals now, and there was no telling what they might do in their desperation to escape. As he splashed water on his face, steeling himself for the media frenzy that was sure to follow, Ethan made a silent vow. He would see this through to the end, no matter what it took. Victoria and Xavier had tried to destroy him. Now, they would learn the true meaning of destruction. Xavier Reeves, a.k.a. Xavier Thornton, sat in the first-class lounge of JFK International Airport, his leg bouncing nervously as he checked his watch for the 10th time in as many minutes. His eyes darted around the room, searching for any sign that his hastily laid plans were about to unravel. The burner phone in his pocket buzzed. He fished it out with trembling hands, his heart rate spiking as he read the message from his contact. FBI en route. ETA 10 minutes. Get out now. Shit, Xavier muttered, shoving the phone back in his pocket and grabbing his carry-on. He'd known the walls were closing in, but he hadn't expected them to move this fast. He should have left days ago, but the promise of one last big score had been too tempting to resist. As he strode towards the exit, a flash of red caught his eye. A breaking news cheering scrolled across the bottom of a nearby TV screen. Prominent businesswoman Victoria Blackwood implicated in massive fraud scheme. Xavier froze, his blood running cold. If they had Victoria, it was only a matter of time before she gave him up. Self-preservation had always been her strongest trait. With renewed urgency, he quickened his pace, mind racing as he formulated a new escape plan. He'd need cash, a new identity, maybe a boat to slip out of the country undetected. But first, he had to get out of this damn airport. As Xavier pushed through the revolving doors into the humid New York night, he allowed himself a moment of bitter reflection. Victoria had been a means to an end, nothing more. A convenient mark with deep pockets and useful connections. But in his haste to cut and run, he'd left her to face the music alone. It wasn't personal. It was just business. Across town, Victoria Blackwood paced the polished floors of her penthouse apartment, a glass of scotch clutched in her manicured hand. The TV blared in the background, endlessly repeating the story of her downfall. "This is impossible," she muttered, taking another gulp of the amber liquid. "I covered my tracks. We covered our tracks." But the evidence scrolling across the screen told a different story. Bank records, witness testimonies, surveillance footage. It was all there, laid bare for the world to see. Her carefully constructed facade was crumbling, and Victoria found herself facing a terrifying reality. For the first time in her life, she was truly alone. Her phone had been ringing nonstop for hours. Lawyers, business associates, so-called friends, all wanting answers she couldn't provide. She'd stopped answering after the third call, unable to bear the thinly veiled accusations and hasty distancing. As the scotch burned its way down her throat, Victoria's thoughts turned to Xavier. Where was he? Why hadn't he contacted her? A cold dread settled in her stomach as she realized the truth. He'd abandoned her, just like she'd abandoned Ethan. Ethan, the name sent a jolt through her system. In all the chaos, she'd almost forgotten about her soon-to-be ex-husband. A desperate plan began to form in her mind. If anyone could help her out of this mess, it was Ethan. He'd always been the steady one, the fixer. Surely, if she appealed to their history, the love they'd once shared. With shaking hands, Victoria reached for her phone. She scrolled through her contacts until she found Ethan's name, her thumb hovering over the call button. Taking a deep breath, she pressed it, bringing the phone to her ear. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3. Victoria. Ethan's voice was cold, devoid of any emotion. "Ethan, thank God." Victoria breathed, relief flooding her system. "I need your help. It's all falling apart, and I don't know what to do. Please. I know I hurt you, but no." The single word cut through her rambling like a knife. "What?" Victoria asked, thrown off balance by the flat refusal. "I said no, Victoria," Ethan repeated, his voice hard as steel. "You made your choices. Now you get to live with the consequences." "But Ethan, please," Victoria pleaded, desperation creeping into her voice. "We were married for 13 years. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. For a moment, Victoria dared to hope. Then Ethan spoke again, his words dripping with contempt. "It meant everything to me, Victoria. But I was just a tool to you, remember? Well, this tool is done fixing your messes. Goodbye." The line went dead, leaving Victoria staring at her phone in disbelief. She'd always prided herself on her ability to manipulate people, to bend them to her will. But Ethan had changed. The man she'd just spoken to was a stranger, cold, unyielding, and completely beyond her reach. As the reality of her situation sank in, Victoria felt the last vestiges of her composure crumble. She sank to the floor, the empty Scotch glass rolling away as sobs racked her body. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. The courtroom buzzed with nervous energy as the bailiff called for order. Journalists scrambled for prime positions, their pens poised over notepads, eager to capture every detail of what promised to be the trial of the decade. At the defense table, Xavier Reeves and Victoria Blackwood sat side by side, a study in contrasts. Xavier exuded an air of casual indifference, his handsome features arranged in a mask of bored contempt. Victoria, on the other hand, was a tightly wound spring, her eyes darting nervously around the room as she smoothed non-existent wrinkles from her designer suit. As the judge entered and the court was called to session, a hush fell over the room. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, approached the bench. "Your Honor, the state calls Ethan Blackwood to the stand." A ripple of excitement passed through the spectators as Ethan made his way to the witness box. He cut an impressive figure in his tailored suit, his face a study in calm determination. As he raised his right hand to be sworn in, his eyes briefly met Victoria's. She flinched at the cold steel she saw there, quickly averting her gaze. The prosecutor began her questioning, leading Ethan through the sordid details of Victoria and Xavier's schemes. With each response, Ethan's voice grew stronger, more assured. He painted a vivid picture of betrayal, fraud, and callous disregard for the lives they'd ruined. From her seat at the defense table, Victoria watched in growing horror as Ethan systematically dismantled the life she'd built. Every lie, every manipulation, every fraudulent deal. He laid them all bare, backed by a mountain of irrefutable evidence. Xavier, for his part, maintained his facade of indifference. But those who looked closely might have noticed the slight tremor in his hands, the sheen of sweat on his upper lip. As Ethan's testimony continued, Xavier's eyes darted more and more frequently to the exits, like a cornered animal seeking escape. When it came time for cross-examination, Victoria and Xavier's high-priced defense attorney did his best to poke holes in Ethan's story. But Ethan remained unflappable, his responses measured and precise. For every attempted gotcha, Ethan had a ready answer, often supported by additional evidence that only served to further incriminate the defendants. As the defense attorney returned to his seat, defeat evident in the slump of his shoulders, the prosecutor called her next witness, Sofia Alvarez. Victoria's head snapped up at the name, her eyes widening in shock as her former business partner took the stand. Sofia's testimony was damning, providing intimate details of Victoria's fraudulent business practices and manipulative personality. "She told me it was just creative accounting," Sofia said, her voice thick with emotion. "By the time I realized the truth, it was too late. She'd set me up to take the fall if anything went wrong." As Sofia's testimony continued, Victoria felt the last threads of her defense unraveling. She leaned over to her lawyer, whispering urgently. The attorney frowned, shaking his head, but Victoria persisted. Finally, the attorney stood. "Your Honor, my client wishes to address the court." The judge raised an eyebrow but nodded his assent. Victoria stood, smoothing her skirt with trembling hands. I'd like to make a deal," she said, her voice quavering. "I have information about Xavier, about others involved in our operations. I'm willing to testify, to tell you everything I know." Xavier's head whipped around, his eyes blazing with fury. "You treacherous bitch," he snarled, lunging towards Victoria. The bailiffs rushed to restrain him as chaos erupted in the courtroom. As Xavier was dragged away, hurling threats and obscenities, Victoria locked eyes with Ethan once more. This time, she saw something flicker behind the steely exterior. Not sympathy or forgiveness, but a satisfaction. In that moment, Victoria realized the full extent of her fall. She'd lost everything: her wealth, her status, her freedom. But worst of all, she'd lost the one person who had truly loved her, and there was no going back. The sun was setting over the city skyline, painting the sky in vibrant hues of orange and pink. Ethan Blackwood stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office, a glass of champagne in hand, watching the play of light on the gleaming skyscrapers. Behind him, the sounds of celebration filled the room. Laughter, the clink of glasses, excited chatter. His team had just landed the biggest contract in the firm's history, a prestigious international project that would put them on the map in a whole new way. "There's the man of the hour." Marcus's booming voice cut through the noise as he approached, clapping Ethan on the shoulder. "How does it feel to be on top of the world, my friend?" Ethan turned, a genuine smile spreading across his face. "It feels pretty damn good, Marcus. We've come a long way." Marcus nodded, his expression growing serious for a moment. "We have indeed. There were times I wasn't sure you'd make it through after. Well, you know." Ethan's mind flashed back to those dark days after Victoria's betrayal, the struggle to keep his head above water as his personal and professional life threatened to implode. He remembered the unwavering support of friends like Marcus, the dogged determination of Olivia as she helped uncover the truth, the technical wizardry of Liam that had been instrumental in bringing Victoria and Xavier to justice. "I couldn't have done it without all of you," Ethan said, raising his glass in a toast. "To friends who become family, and to new beginnings." As if on cue, Olivia appeared at his side, slipping her hand into his. "What are we toasting to?" she asked, her eyes twinkling. Ethan pulled her close, planting a soft kiss on her forehead. "To us," he said simply. "To surviving the storm and coming out stronger on the other side." Olivia's smile widened, a mix of pride and love shining in her eyes. What had started as a professional collaboration during the investigation had blossomed into something neither of them had expected. In Olivia, Ethan had found not just a partner, but a true equal, someone who challenged him, supported him, and understood him in a way Victoria never had. As the party continued around them, Ethan found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought him to this moment. The pain of betrayal, the thirst for revenge, the long nights spent building a case against those who had wronged him. It all seemed like a lifetime ago. Victoria and Xavier were serving long prison sentences, their empire of lies and fraud dismantled. The victims of their schemes, including Sofia Alvarez, had received restitution and a measure of justice. And Ethan had emerged from the crucible stronger, wiser, and more appreciative of the true riches in his life. "Penny for your thoughts?" Olivia asked, squeezing his hand gently. Ethan shook his head, chuckling softly, just thinking about how sometimes the best revenge is living well. Olivia nodded, understanding flashing in her eyes. "And are you?" "Living well, I mean." Ethan looked around the room, taking in the faces of his friends and colleagues. His gaze settled on Olivia, and he felt a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the champagne. "You know what?" he said, pulling her closer. "I really am." As the celebration continued into the night, Ethan allowed himself to fully embrace the moment. The past was behind him, the future bright with promise. He had weathered the storm, faced his demons, and come out the other side not just intact, but triumphant. In the end, Victoria's cruel words had proven prophetic, though not in the way she had intended. Ethan had indeed been a tool for justice, for redemption, and ultimately for his own salvation. And as he raised his glass one more time, surrounded by the people who truly mattered, Ethan Blackwood knew that he had finally found the passion, spontaneity, and excitement that had been missing from his life for far too long. The city lights twinkled below, a testament to the endless possibilities that lay ahead. And Ethan was ready to embrace them all, one triumphant step at a time. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, Please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there. Welcome to another story on Cheating Tales Lab. We're so happy to have you here, and today's story is one we think you'll really enjoy. So without further ado, let's begin. Dominic Reeves slouched in his ergonomic chair, the glow of his computer screen casting harsh shadows across his face. The clock in the corner of his monitor mockingly displayed 11:37 p.m. Another late night at Reeves and Associates, par for the course for the 42-year-old structural engineer and co-founder. His phone buzzed, dancing across the polished mahogany of his desk. Dominic glanced at the screen. Vanessa's name illuminated, his brow furrowed. She was supposed to be at a sustainable architecture conference in Chicago. Maybe she was calling to say goodnight? Before he could reach for the device, it connected on its own. Dominic froze, his hand hovering above the phone as unfamiliar laughter and the clink of glasses filtered through the speaker. A man's voice, smooth and confident, cut through the background noise. Another round on Reeves and Associates tab. That clueless fool is financing our little venture without even knowing it. Dominic's blood ran cold. He gripped the edge of his desk, knuckles whitening as Vanessa's reply came clearly through the speaker. Dom's always been blind to anything beyond his precious buildings. He's so boring. He practically blends into the walls he designs. The mysterious man chuckled, a sound that sent shivers down Dominic's spine. Well, soon enough, those walls will come crumbling down. To us and to the future of Obsidian Structures. The call abruptly ended as background noise suggested Vanessa finally noticed her phone was on. Dominic sat in stunned silence, his world suddenly off-kilter. The carefully constructed reality he'd built his life around had just shattered like poorly tempered glass. Over the next week, Dominic maintained a facade of normalcy while secretly investigating. He went through the motions at work, nodding at appropriate times during meetings and signing off on designs with mechanical precision. But behind his calm exterior, his mind raced, piecing together the puzzle of betrayal. Late one night, hunched over his laptop in his home office, Dominic's fingers flew across the keyboard. He'd been digging into Vanessa's recent communications and financial records. His chest tightened as he uncovered the identity of her lover, Xavier Blackwood, CEO of rival firm Obsidian Structures. Damn it, Dominic muttered. He needed help, someone who could dig deeper than he could alone. The next day, Dominic found himself in a dimly lit coffee shop, sitting across from Lydia Chen. She was a brilliant but unconventional private investigator with a background in corporate espionage. Her sharp eyes assessed him over the rim of her mug. "So, Mr. Reeves," Lydia said, her voice low, "you want me to look into your wife and this Blackwood character?" Dominic nodded, sliding a folder across the table. "I need to know everything. How long this has been going on, what information they've shared, all of it." Lydia's findings over the following days made Dominic's stomach churn. Vanessa had been leaking confidential designs and bid information to Xavier for months. The crown jewel of Reeves and Associates, their groundbreaking eco-friendly skyscraper project, the Verdant Spire, was Obsidian's primary target. As if the professional betrayal wasn't enough, Dominic discovered large, unexplained withdrawals from the company accounts tracing back months. The magnitude of Vanessa's deceit was staggering. Unable to bear the weight alone, Dominic called his best friend and business partner, Marcus Holbrook, to meet him at their favorite bar. Marcus listened in shocked silence as Dominic laid out the sordid details. When Dominic finished, Marcus downed his whiskey in one gulp and signaled for another. "Jesus, Dom," Marcus said, shaking his head. "I can't believe Vanessa would do this. To you, to the company, to all of us." He reached across the bar, gripping Dominic's shoulder. "Whatever you need, whatever it takes to fix this mess, I'm with you. We'll make it right." Dominic nodded, a smile tugging at his lips. For the first time since that fateful phone call, he felt a glimmer of hope. He wasn't alone in this fight. Dominic sat at his desk, a legal pad before him covered in scribbled notes and diagrams. He was crafting a multifaceted plan for revenge, targeting both personal and professional retribution. His pen moved swiftly as he outlined his strategy, each step carefully considered. First, he began feeding false information about the Verdant Spire project through channels he knew Vanessa was monitoring. He created dummy files with subtly flawed designs and left them where she would easily find them. Next, Dominic anonymously tipped off Elizabeth Blackwood, Xavier's wife and Obsidian CFO, about potential financial irregularities in the company. He smirked as he imagined the chaos this would cause in both Xavier's professional and personal life. Dominic called Gabriela Santos, an ambitious junior architect at his firm, into his office. As she sat across from him, he leaned forward, his voice low and conspiratorial. "Gabriela, I have a special project I'd like you to assist me with," he said, watching her eyes light up with interest. "There may be a significant promotion in it for you if we're successful." As Gabriela left his office, practically buzzing with excitement, Dominic turned his attention to his public image. He began making large, traceable donations to environmental charities, creating a persona of a philanthropic businessman deeply invested in sustainability. Under the guise of product testing for the Verdant Spire, Dominic installed cutting-edge security systems in both his home and office. He couldn't afford to leave any vulnerabilities for Vanessa or Xavier to exploit. The day Vanessa was due to return from her conference, Dominic stood in front of the bathroom mirror, practicing his expressions. He had to play the role of devoted husband perfectly while setting his plans in motion. As he heard the front door open, Dominic took a deep breath, steeling himself for the performance of his life. He plastered on a warm smile and walked downstairs to greet his wife. "Welcome home, honey," he said, embracing Vanessa and planting a kiss on her cheek. "How was the conference?" Vanessa's smile didn't quite reach her eyes as she launched into a rehearsed spiel about sustainable design innovations. Dominic nodded along, asking appropriate questions while inwardly marveling at the ease with which she lied. As they settled into their evening routine, Dominic felt a cold determination settle over him. The game was on, and he intended to win. Dominic Reeves stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his tie with practiced precision. His reflection stared back at him, a mask of calm hiding the storm brewing beneath. It had been 2 weeks since Vanessa's return from her conference, and the game was well underway. He picked up his phone, scrolling through a series of text messages between himself and Gabriela Santos. The exchanges were innocent enough at first glance. Discussions about the Verdant Spire project, peppered with the occasional flirtatious comment. But Dominic knew better. Each message was a carefully placed breadcrumb, leading down a path of fabricated infidelity. As he drove to work, Dominic's mind wandered to Gabriela. The young architect had proven to be an invaluable asset in his plan. Her enthusiasm for the special project was genuine, even if she didn't know the full scope of what she was involved in. He felt a twinge of guilt, using her ambition as a pawn in his game of revenge. But he quickly pushed the feeling aside. In this war, there would be collateral damage. Arriving at the office, Dominic made his way to the conference room where the project teams were gathering. He nodded at Marcus, who gave him a knowing look. As the meeting began, Dominic cleared his throat. "I have an announcement to make," he said, his voice carrying across the room. "Given the critical nature of the Verdant Spire project, I've decided to assign Gabriela Santos to lead the environmental sustainability aspect." He watched Vanessa from the corner of his eye, noting the slight narrowing of her gaze as she glanced between him and Gabriela. The seed of suspicion had been planted. Across town, Lydia Chin adjusted her cleaning uniform, pushing a cart of supplies down the hallway of Obsidian Structure's main office. Her keen eyes scanned each room she entered, identifying optimal locations for her surveillance equipment. With practiced ease, she planted bugs in strategic spots, beneath desks, behind picture frames, inside air vents. As she worked, snippets of conversation drifted to her ears. Executives discussed profit margins and market shares, but it was the hushed tones in Xavier Blackwood's office that caught her attention. She lingered near the doorway, pretending to dust a nearby shelf. The structural integrity reports for Project Apex are concerning. A voice murmured. If this gets out, we're finished. Lydia's eyebrows raised slightly. Project Apex, Obsidian's flagship development. This was exactly the kind of information Dominic had hired her to uncover. Back at Reeves and Associates, Dominic sat in his office, poring over the latest reports from the Verdant Spire project. A knock at the door interrupted his concentration. "Come in," he called, not looking up from his desk. Vanessa entered, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. "Dom, do you have a minute?" He glanced up, noting the tension in her posture. "Of course. What's on your mind?" She hesitated, then spoke in a rush. "I couldn't help but notice you've been spending a lot of time with Gabriella lately. Is there something I should know?" Dominic leaned back in his chair, his face a perfect mask of innocence. "She's leading a crucial part of the Verdant Spire project. Of course we're going to be working closely together." Vanessa's eyes narrowed slightly. "Right, of course." She turned to leave, then paused at the door. "We should have dinner tonight. It's been a while since we've had a proper meal together." As the door closed behind her, Dominic allowed himself a small smile. The puppet master's strings were beginning to tighten. Later that evening, as Dominic prepared for his dinner with Vanessa, his phone buzzed with a message from Lydia. He opened it, his eyes widening as he read the contents. A major flaw in Obsidian's Project Apex. This was the break they'd been waiting for. With quick, decisive keystrokes, Dominic composed an anonymous email. He sent it to several industry watchdogs, hinting at potential safety concerns in Obsidian's latest development. As he hit send, he could almost hear the whispers of concern spreading among Obsidian's investors. Across the city, in the offices of Reeves and Associates, Marcus Holbrook worked late into the night. He pored over legal documents and financial statements, quietly shoring up the company's defenses. Every contract was scrutinized, every financial transaction double-checked. They would be ready for whatever storm was coming. As the pieces of his plan fell into place, Dominic felt a surge of satisfaction. The counterattack had begun, and Obsidian structures would never see it coming. Xavier Blackwood's office was a testament to his success. Floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city, modern art adorning the walls, and a desk that probably cost more than most people's cars. But none of that impressed Dominic Reeves as he sat across from his rival, maintaining a carefully crafted facade of desperation. "I never thought I'd be sitting here, having this conversation," Dominic said, his voice tinged with what sounded like regret. "But the truth is, Xavier, I'm considering selling my shares in Reeves and Associates." Xavier's eyebrows shot up, a predatory glint in his eyes. "Really? I have to say, Dominic, I'm surprised. Your company has always been your pride and joy." Dominic nodded, looking down at his hands. "Things change. The stress of running the company, the constant pressure, it's taking its toll. I think it might be time for me to step back, focus on other aspects of my life." As Xavier leaned forward, interest peaked, Dominic knew he had him hooked. Over the next hour, he fed Xavier a masterfully crafted web of misinformation about the Verdant Spire project. He watched with inward satisfaction as Xavier's eyes lit up at what he thought were critical flaws in the design, opportunities that Obsidian could exploit. Little did Xavier know, he was walking into a trap of Dominic's making. Meanwhile, across town, Vanessa Reeves sat in her office at Reeves and Associates, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. She stared at her computer screen, unseeing, as she replayed the events of the past few weeks in her head. Dominic's sudden interest in Gabriella Santos had thrown her off balance. She'd always seen her husband as predictable, reliable, boring even. But now, doubt gnawed at her. Was he having an affair? The thought both infuriated and terrified her. Her phone buzzed with a message from Xavier. "Meeting went well. Dom's considering selling. This could be our chance." Vanessa's heart raced. This was what they'd been waiting for, wasn't it? The opportunity to take control of Reeves and Associates, to reshape it in their vision. But as she thought about the life she'd built with Dominic, the comfort and security he provided, A wave of uncertainty washed over her. She picked up a file from her desk, intending to review some calculations for the Verdant Spire project. As she flipped through the pages, her distracted mind failed to catch a critical error in the numbers. She signed off on the document, unaware of the costly mistake she'd just made. Across the hall, Gabriela Santos worked diligently on her portion of the Verdant Spire project. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about Dominic's recent behavior. The late-night meetings, the secretive phone calls, the way he'd suddenly thrust her into a high-profile role. It all felt calculated. As she pored over the latest designs, a notification popped up on her computer. An email from the IT department, warning about a potential security breach. Gabriela's eyes narrowed as she read the details. Someone had been accessing confidential files related to the Verdant Spire project, files that only a handful of people should have had access to. Her mind raced. Could it be Dominic? Was this why he'd brought her onto the project? To cover his tracks as he sold company secrets? Determined to uncover the truth, Gabriela began her own investigation, unaware that she was playing right into Dominic's hands. In another part of the city, Elizabeth Blackwood sat in her home office, a glass of wine in hand, as she reviewed Obsidian's latest financial reports. As CFO, it was her job to ensure the company's fiscal health. But lately, something had been nagging at her. Small discrepancies in the books, unexplained expenses, meetings that her husband failed to mention. Her computer pinged with a new email. Anonymous sender. She opened it, her eyes widening as she scrolled through its contents. Photos of Xavier with Vanessa Reeves, snippets of incriminating emails, records of suspicious financial transactions. Elizabeth's hand shook as she set down her wine glass. She glanced at the calendar on her desk. The board meeting was tomorrow. This couldn't be a coincidence. As the sun set over the city, the various players in this high-stakes game of deception moved their pieces, each unaware of the true complexity of the board they were playing on. Back in his office, Dominic leaned back in his chair, a satisfied smile playing on his lips. The double-edged gambit was in motion. Xavier thought he was closing in on a victory, but in reality, he was leading himself and Vanessa right into Dominic's carefully laid trap. A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. Gabriela entered, her face a mask of determination. "Mr. Reeves, we need to talk," she said, her voice steady despite the nervousness evident in her eyes. Dominic nodded, gesturing for her to take a seat. He'd been expecting this confrontation. It was time to bring Gabriela fully into the fold. "I know something's going on," Gabriela continued. "The security breaches, the strange assignments, the way you've been acting. I want to know what's really happening." Dominic studied her for a moment, then made his decision. "You're right, Gabriela. There is more going on than you know. And I think it's time I told you everything." Over the next hour, Dominic laid out the entire situation. Vanessa's betrayal, Xavier's schemes, and his own plan for revenge. He watched as shock, anger, and finally understanding flashed across Gabriela's face. "So, where do I fit into all this?" she asked when he'd finished. Dominic leaned forward, his eyes intense. "I'm offering you a choice, Gabriela. Walk away now, no hard feelings. Or stay, become a true partner in this, and help me save this company. If we succeed, I promise you'll have a future here beyond anything you've imagined." Gabriela was quiet for a long moment, weighing her options. Finally, she met Dominic's gaze. "I'm in. What do you need me to do?" As Gabriela left his office, now fully committed to their cause, Dominic felt a mix of relief and anticipation. The final pieces were falling into place. Across town, Xavier and Vanessa met in a dimly lit bar, their heads close together as they discussed their plans in hushed tones. "We need to move faster," Xavier urged. Dominic's wavering. "If we don't act now, we might lose our chance." Vanessa nodded, though a flicker of doubt crossed her face. "You're right. We'll accelerate the timeline. By this time next month, Reeves and Associates will be ours." As they clinked glasses, sealing their pact, neither realized they were playing directly into Dominic's hands. The puppet master's strings were drawing tight, and soon, very soon, the final act would begin. The annual Architectural Innovation Gala was in full swing. The city's elite mingled in the grand ballroom, champagne flutes in hand, their chatter a constant buzz beneath the soft classical music. Dominic Reeves stood near the stage, outwardly calm, but inwardly coiled like a spring. Tonight was the culmination of months of planning, the moment when all his careful manipulations would come to fruition. He caught sight of Vanessa across the room, resplendent in a form-fitting black gown, laughing at something Xavier Blackwood was saying. The sight of them together no longer filled him with pain or anger. Instead, he felt a cold determination. By the end of the night, their smiles would be wiped away. "Ladies and gentlemen," the MC's voice rang out, "please take your seats. Our keynote speaker for this evening, Mr. Dominic Reeves of Reeves & Associates, will begin shortly." As the crowd settled, Dominic made his way to the podium. He looked out over the sea of faces, colleagues, rivals, investors. They were all here to witness what they thought would be a standard speech about innovation in architecture. They had no idea they were about to become audience to the downfall of two of the industry's rising stars. "Good evening," Dominic began, his voice steady and confident. "Tonight, I want to talk about integrity in design, about the responsibility we have, not just to our clients, but to the very fabric of our cities and the people who inhabit them." As he spoke, Dominic wove a compelling narrative about ethics in architecture and construction. He could see heads nodding in agreement, people leaning forward in their seats. They were captivated, hanging on his every word. But integrity isn't just about following building codes or using sustainable materials, Dominic continued. It's about honesty in our business practices, loyalty to our partners, and a commitment to innovation that doesn't come at the cost of ethics. He paused, his finger hovering over a small remote in his hand. "Let me show you what I mean." With a click, the large screen behind him came to life. What appeared was not the expected slide about sustainable design, but instead a series of emails, financial records, and photographs. Dominic watched as confusion rippled through the crowd, quickly followed by shocked gasps and murmurs as people began to understand what they were seeing. "What you're looking at," Dominic said, his voice cutting through the growing chaos, "is evidence of a long-running corporate espionage operation. My wife, Vanessa Reeves, and Xavier Blackwood of Obsidian Structures have been engaged in a conspiracy to steal proprietary designs and information from Reeves and Associates." The room erupted in pandemonium. Dominic saw Vanessa's face drain of color, her eyes wide with shock and fear. Xavier was on his feet, his face contorted with rage. "This is preposterous," Xavier shouted. "You have no proof." Dominic's reply was calm, almost pitying. "On the contrary, Mr. Blackwood, I have all the proof I need." He gestured to a group of stern-faced individuals who had just entered the ballroom. "And so, do the FBI agents who are here tonight." As the agents moved through the crowd towards Vanessa and Xavier, Dominic continued his presentation. He laid out a damning case, presenting irrefutable evidence of their misdeeds to the stunned audience of industry players and now law enforcement. Vanessa, seeing the net closing in, made a desperate dash for the exit. But before she could reach it, she was cut off by a familiar face. Lydia Chun, no longer in her cleaner's disguise, but now sporting an FBI badge. "Going somewhere, Mrs. Reeves?" Lydia asked, her voice cold. Xavier, realizing the game was up, made a last-ditch effort to turn the tables. "You're no better than us Reeves," he shouted. "You've been manipulating events, playing us all like puppets. You're just as guilty." Dominic's response was to calmly present records of his recent activities, the charitable donations, the product testing of new security systems. Each action, seemingly innocent on its own, now revealed as part of his master plan to expose the corruption within the industry. "I may have bent the rules," Dominic admitted, "but I never broke them. Everything I've done has been in service of uncovering the truth and protecting the integrity of my company and our projects." As Vanessa and Xavier were led away in handcuffs, the room buzzed with shocked conversations. Dominic stepped down from the podium, feeling a mix of triumph and exhaustion. It was over. The house of cards had come crashing down. Marcus appeared at his side, clapping him on the shoulder. "You did it, Dom. It's finally over." Dominic nodded, watching as the last of the FBI agents exited the ballroom. "It's over," he agreed. "But the real work is just beginning." As the gala dissolved into a flurry of press statements and police interviews, Dominic stood apart from the chaos. Reeves and associates had emerged from this ordeal not just intact, but as a beacon of ethical practices in an industry plagued by corruption. The road ahead would be challenging, but for the first time in months, Dominic felt ready to face it. The puppet master had cut his strings, and now, finally, he was free. The courthouse bustled with activity, a hive of suits and briefcases, murmured conversations, and clacking heels. Dominic Reeves stood in the lobby, his posture rigid, eyes scanning the crowd. He'd been here every day for the past week, watching as Vanessa and Xavier were dragged through a gauntlet of legal proceedings. Today was different. Today, he would take the stand. As he made his way through the security checkpoint, Dominic's mind wandered to the events that had led to this moment. The betrayal, the careful planning, the dramatic reveal at the Architectural Innovation Gala. It all seemed like a lifetime ago, yet the wounds were still fresh. The courtroom was a battlefield of a different sort. Vanessa and Xavier sat at separate tables, their lawyers flanking them like generals preparing for war. Dominic caught Vanessa's eye as he entered. For a moment, he saw a flicker of the woman he'd once loved, scared, vulnerable. But then her mask of cold indifference slipped back into place, and she turned away. The prosecution calls Dominic Reeves to the stand. Dominic rose, straightening his tie as he approached the witness box. He placed his hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, and settled into the hard wooden chair. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, approached. "Mr. Reeves, please tell the court about the events leading up to the night of the Architectural Innovation Gala." Dominic took a deep breath and began his testimony. He spoke of late nights at the office, of overheard phone calls and discovered emails. He detailed the complex web of deceit that Vanessa and Xavier had woven, his voice steady and clear as he laid out each piece of evidence. As he spoke, Dominic could see the jurors' expressions changing. Shock gave way to disgust, then to anger. He'd meticulously documented everything, and now that preparation was paying off. Xavier's lawyer, a slick-haired man with a permanent sneer, tried to poke holes in Dominic's story during cross-examination. But Dominic was ready. For every accusation, he had a counterpoint. For every insinuation, he had proof to the contrary. "And you expect us to believe that you orchestrated this elaborate scheme solely to uncover the truth?" Xavier's lawyer asked, his voice dripping with skepticism. Dominic met his gaze steadily. "I expect you to look at the evidence, counselor. Everything I did was within the bounds of the law, with the sole purpose of exposing a criminal conspiracy that threatened not just my company, but the integrity of our entire industry." As Dominic stepped down from the stand, he caught sight of Marcus in the gallery. His friend and business partner gave him a subtle nod of approval. They both knew this was just the beginning. While the criminal trial unfolded in the public eye, Dominic was fighting another battle behind closed doors. The divorce proceedings with Vanessa were ugly, to say the least. Dominic's lawyer, a battle axe of a woman named Helena Graves, argued forcefully for a favorable settlement. "Your Honor, Mrs. Reeves' criminal activities have not only damaged my client emotionally, but have put his entire company at risk. We're asking for a complete separation of assets, with Mrs. Reeves forfeiting any claim to Reeves and Associates or its subsidiaries." Vanessa's lawyer tried to paint her as a victim of Xavier's manipulation, but Helena was having none of it. She presented email after email, document after document, each one damning Vanessa further. In the end, the judge ruled in Dominic's favor. Vanessa would walk away with nothing but her personal belongings and a small stipend, far less than she would have received in a normal divorce settlement. But Helena wasn't done. As Vanessa and her lawyer prepared to leave the courtroom, Helena approached the bench. "Your Honor, Given the ongoing criminal investigation and the potential for retaliation, we're requesting a restraining order against Mrs. Reeves. The judge considered for a moment, then nodded. Granted, Mrs. Reeves is to have no contact with Mr. Reeves or any employees of Reeves and Associates, and is barred from accessing any shared assets or properties. Dominic watched as Vanessa's face crumpled. As Dominic left the courthouse that day, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The legal battles were far from over, but he'd won a significant victory. Reeves and Associates was safe, at least for now. But the real surprise came later that week, when Elizabeth Blackwood, Xavier's wife and CFO of Obsidian Structures, approached the prosecution. Furious at her husband's betrayal and facing the collapse of her own career, she offered to turn state's witness. Dominic sat in on her deposition, watching as she laid bare the inner workings of Obsidian's corrupt practices. Her testimony was a goldmine, providing context and corroboration for much of the evidence Dominic had gathered. As Elizabeth detailed Xavier's schemes, his backroom deals, and his plans to sabotage Reeves and Associates, Dominic felt satisfaction. The house of cards was well and truly collapsing now. With the legal proceedings in full swing, Dominic knew he couldn't devote his full attention to running Reeves and Associates. He called Marcus into his office one evening, long after most of the staff had gone home. "I need you to take charge of the day-to-day operations," Dominic said, leaning back in his chair. "I trust you to keep things running smoothly while I focus on these legal battles." Marcus nodded, his expression serious. "You can count on me, Dom. We've come too far to let anything slip now." As Marcus left the office, Dominic turned to look out the window at the city skyline. Somewhere out there, the Verdant Spire was waiting to be built. He'd fought hard to protect this dream, and he wasn't about to let it go now. The legal labyrinths were complex and treacherous, but Dominic was determined to see this through to the end. The reckoning had only just begun. The bail hearing for Xavier Blackwood was a tense affair. Despite the mountain of evidence against him, his lawyers had managed to convince the judge that he wasn't a flight risk. As Xavier walked out of the courthouse, a free man for the moment, his eyes met Dominic's. There was a promise in that look, a vow of revenge that sent a chill down Dominic's spine. Dominic didn't have to wait long to see what Xavier had planned. It was a crisp autumn morning when he got the call from the construction site of the Verdant Spire. "Mr. Reeves, there's been an incident." The site foreman's voice crackled over the phone. "An explosion. Small, but, sir, it looks deliberate." Dominic's blood ran cold. He was in his car and speeding towards the site before he'd even ended the call. As he pulled up to the construction zone, he saw the police cars, the fire trucks, the curious onlookers held back by yellow tape. The damage was minimal, a small blast in a non-critical area. But that wasn't the point. This was a message. As Dominic surveyed the scene, a detective approached him. "Mr. Reeves, we found this near the blast site." He held up an evidence bag containing a partially burned business card. Dominic's business card. "You've got to be kidding me," Dominic muttered. He knew immediately what this was. A frame job. Xavier was trying to pin this on him, to paint him as an eco-terrorist willing to sabotage his own project for. What? Insurance money? Publicity? It didn't matter. The accusation alone could be devastating. The next few days were a whirlwind of police interviews, press statements, and damage control. Dominic maintained his innocence, but he could see the doubt in people's eyes. The whispers followed him everywhere he went. It was Gabriella who provided the breakthrough. She'd been working late at the office, poring over security footage from the construction site, when she noticed something odd. "Dominic, look at this," she said, rewinding the footage. "See that van? It shows up every night for a week before the explosion, always at the same time. But it's not one of our contractors." Dominic leaned in, squinting at the grainy image. "Can you enhance that logo on the side?" Gabriella tapped a few keys, and the image sharpened. Dominic's eyes widened as he recognized the stylized O of Obsidian Structures. "Got you, you bastard," he murmured. With this new evidence, the tide quickly turned. The police investigation shifted focus, and soon they had traced the van back to a shell company owned by Xavier. It was a break they needed. The failed frame job backfired spectacularly on Xavier. Public opinion, which had been wavering, now solidified firmly behind Dominic. He was no longer just a wrong businessman. He was a victim of a malicious conspiracy, fighting back against corruption in the industry. But the real shock came when Vanessa, facing years in prison and seeing her chances of leniency evaporating, made a desperate play. She reached out to the prosecution, offering to testify against Xavier in exchange for a reduced sentence. Dominic sat in on her deposition, watching the woman he'd once loved spill secrets like poison from a wound. She detailed not just Xavier's schemes, but a broader conspiracy involving corrupt city officials and other major construction firms. It wasn't just Obsidian, Vanessa said, her voice barely above a whisper. Half the major projects in this city are built on bribes and kickbacks. The Verdant Spire was a threat to all of them. An actually sustainable, ethical project, it would have exposed everyone. As Vanessa talked, Dominic's mind raced. This was bigger than he'd imagined. It wasn't just about saving his company anymore. This was a chance to clean up the entire industry. He left the deposition and immediately called Marcus. "We need to pivot," he said without preamble. "The Verdant Spire isn't just a building project anymore. It's going to be the flagship of a new initiative. We're going to position Reeves and Associates as the leader in ethical, transparent construction practices." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "That's a big move, Dom. Are you sure about this?" Dominic looked out over the city skyline. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life. It's time we built something that matters." The next few weeks were a flurry of activity. Dominic gave interviews, wrote op-eds, and spoke at industry conferences. He used the information from Vanessa's testimony to shine a light on the dark corners of the construction world, positioning Reeves and Associates as a beacon of integrity in a corrupt industry. The public ate it up. Dominic became a sort of folk hero, the honest businessman fighting against a rigged system. Investors flocked to the Verdant Spire project, seeing it as not just a building, but a symbol of a new era in urban development. As the dust settled and the legal proceedings wound down, Dominic stood at the window of his office, looking out at the city he was helping to reshape. The path to this moment had been painful, filled with betrayal and hardship. But as he watched the sun set over the skyline, Dominic felt a sense of purpose he hadn't experienced in years. The reckoning wasn't over, not by a long shot. But for the first time since this all began, Dominic allowed himself to feel a glimmer of hope. The future, like the city spread out before him, was full of possibility. The congressional hearing room buzzed with anticipation. Journalists jostled for position, their cameras at the ready. Senators shuffled papers. Aides whispered last-minute advice. And at the center of it all, looking calm and collected, sat Dominic Reeves. "Mr. Reeves," the committee chairman began, "you've been invited here today to discuss the state of ethical urban development in our nation. Given your recent experiences, we're particularly interested in your perspective on transparency and sustainability in the construction industry. Please begin when you're ready." Dominic leaned forward, his voice clear and steady as he began to speak. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen of the committee, what I'm about to share with you isn't just my story. It's a wake-up call for our entire industry and indeed for our cities themselves." Over the next hour, Dominic laid out a compelling vision of ethical urban development. He spoke of transparent bidding processes, of sustainable materials and practices, of buildings that serve communities rather than just turning profits. But more than that, he spoke of the rot at the heart of the current system, the corruption, the kickbacks, the corners cut at the expense of safety and sustainability. "The Verdant Spire project," Dominic said, his voice rising with passion, "was more than just a building. It was a threat to those who profit from the old way of doing things. That's why they tried to destroy it, and me along with it. But in doing so, they've given us an opportunity to rebuild not just a single structure, but an entire industry." As Dominic spoke, He could see the impact of his words. Senators leaned forward, their expressions intent. Journalists scribbled furiously in their notebooks. This wasn't just testimony. It was a call to action. We stand at a crossroads, Dominic concluded. We can continue down the path of short-term profit and long-term destruction, or we can choose a new way, a way that values transparency, sustainability, and the needs of our communities. The choice is ours. Thank you. The room erupted in applause as Dominic stepped back from the microphone. As he made his way out of the hearing room, he was mobbed by reporters, all clamoring for additional comments. But Dominic's mind was already elsewhere, focused on the next steps in his plan. The congressional testimony had the effect Dominic had hoped for. It captured national attention, sparking debates about urban development and ethical business practices. More importantly, it positioned Reeves and Associates as a leader in this new paradigm. When the bidding opened for an expanded version of the Verdant Spire project, now envisioned as a citywide green infrastructure initiative, Reeves and Associates was the clear frontrunner. Their proposal, which integrated sustainable design principles with community-focused development, was hailed as visionary. The day they won the bid, Dominic called the entire staff into the main conference room. As he looked out over the sea of faces, some familiar, some new, he felt a surge of pride. Today marks a new chapter for Reeves and Associates, he began. We're not just building a tower anymore. We're building the future of our city. Each one of you has played a part in getting us here, and each one of you will be crucial in what comes next. He paused, his eyes finding Gabriella in the crowd. Which brings me to my next announcement. In recognition of her invaluable contributions and unwavering loyalty, I'm promoting Gabriela Santos to partner. The room broke into applause as a stunned Gabriella made her way to the front. As Dominic shook her hand, he saw in her eyes the same determination, the same passion for ethical architecture that had driven him all these years. Thank you, Gabriella said, her voice thick with emotion. I promise to uphold the values that Reeves and Associates stands for. As the celebration wound down and the staff filtered out, Dominic retreated to his office. He had one more piece of business to attend to. The next morning, Dominic held a press conference to announce the establishment of the Reeves Foundation for Ethical Architecture. Funded by his divorce settlement and a significant portion of his personal wealth, the foundation would provide scholarships for aspiring architects and fund watchdog initiatives to promote transparency in the industry. This foundation, Dominic told the assembled press, is my way of ensuring that what happened to me, to my company, never happens to anyone else. We're going to shine a light into every dark corner of this industry until there's nowhere left for corruption to hide. As Dominic fielded questions from the press, across town another drama was unfolding. Xavier Blackwood sat in a courtroom ashen-faced as the judge read out the verdict. Guilty on all charges. His empire was crumbling, Obsidian structures already in the throes of bankruptcy. Vanessa's fate was less severe but no less final. Her reduced sentence meant she'd see the outside of a prison cell again, but her reputation was in tatters. The judge's ruling barred her from ever working in the architecture or construction industries again. Months passed. The Verdant Spire began to rise from the ground, its innovative design a testament to what was possible when ethics and innovation worked hand in hand. Dominic threw himself into the project, overseeing every detail, determined to make it a model for future developments around the world. On the day the final beam was placed atop the Verdant Spire, Dominic took a private elevator to the observation deck. As the door slid open, he stepped out onto the platform, the wind whipping around him. The city sprawled out below, a tapestry of light and shadow in the fading afternoon sun. Dominic walked to the edge, his hands gripping the railing. From this vantage point, he could see the scars of the old city, the neglected neighborhoods, the polluted waterways, the congested streets. But he could also see the first signs of change. Green spaces were sprouting up where there had once been only concrete. Solar panels glinted on rooftops. The Verdant Spire itself stood as a beacon of what was possible when innovation and ethics worked hand in hand. He thought about the cost of this victory. His marriage destroyed, friendships shattered, the innocence of believing in a fair and just world lost forever. But as he looked out over the city he'd fought so hard to protect and improve, Dominic felt a sense of purpose that transcended personal loss. The sound of footsteps behind him broke his reverie. Gabriella approached, a hard hat tucked under her arm. "It's really something, isn't it?" she said, coming to stand beside him at the railing. Dominic nodded. "It's more than I ever imagined it could be." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, both lost in thought. Then Gabriella spoke again. "I heard about Xavier's conviction. 20 years, with no possibility of parole for at least 15. Dominic's jaw tightened. It's what he deserves. Obsidian Structures is finished. The bankruptcy proceedings will ensure that every investor, every employee gets what they're owed." Gabriella hesitated, then added, "And Vanessa?" A flood of emotions washed over Dominic at the mention of his ex-wife's name. Anger, betrayal, and underneath it all, a lingering sadness for what might have been. 5 years, he said finally. Reduced sentence for her testimony. But she'll never work in this industry again. The judge made sure of that. Gabriella nodded, then turned to face Dominic fully. "So what now? We've won. The Verdant Spire is nearly complete. The Reeves Foundation is changing the face of architectural education. What's next for Dominic Reeves?" Dominic smiled, a genuine expression that reached his eyes for the first time in what felt like years. "Now, Gabriella, we build. Not just buildings, but a legacy, a way of doing business that values more than just the bottom line. We've been given a second chance, and I intend to make the most of it." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the Verdant Spire's shadow across the city, Dominic felt a sense of peace settle over him. The path to this moment had been fraught with betrayal, pain, and hardship. But standing here, overlooking the city he dedicated his life to improving, Dominic knew that every sacrifice had been worth it. The future stretched out before him, as vast and full of possibility as the city's skyline. And for the first time in a long time, Dominic Reeves was ready to face it head on. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.
Thursday night. After 20 years of marriage, my 39-year-old, attractive wife, mother of our 2 girls and the love of my life, dropped a bombshell on me. She told me she was going out on a date with a colleague from work the next night. Sarah and I were teenagers when we got married. We'd been together less than a year when she got pregnant with our daughter. We were crazy about each other, got married, and 7 months later, we welcomed Emily into our lives. Our marriage was filled with love, and we had 2 wonderful kids who adored both of us. I built my landscaping business from scratch, and it grew into a multi-million-dollar enterprise, giving us a comfortable and satisfying life. Never in a million years did I expect to hear something like that from her. It hit me like a ton of bricks as I sat on the couch with a glass of scotch while she told me that since the kids went off to university, she had been feeling depressed and unhappy. I thought we had the perfect marriage, so this news was a heavy blow. Sarah revealed that Ryan from accounting had been a close friend who had helped her through her depression, which was news to me. It was odd because she had never mentioned being depressed or even upset. The idea of my wife relying on another man to help her with her emotions was painful, but the fact that she wanted to be with him was devastating. Apparently, Ryan is married with 3 young daughters and is pretending to be some kind of counselor, when in reality, he's just a predator preying on vulnerable, married women. He sees them as easy targets because he knows they're susceptible and detached. Sarah said, "Michael, I can't keep this from you. I hope you understand, but I need to do this for myself. It might sound selfish, but just give me one night to see how it goes." I was furious and wanted to scream, but I knew how Sarah was. Once she made up her mind about something, there was no changing it. As she finished her announcement, I sat there with a blank expression, staring at her while she nervously sat across from me on the small sofa. The silence was unbearable as I refused to say a word. Instead, I calmly finished my scotch, stood up, and walked out of the room. Sarah followed me, pleading, "Michael, don't ignore me. Stop sulking. This is happening, and I had to tell you before anything happened. I would never cheat on you, and I need you to know everything. We've always been honest with each other." I looked at her, and she must have seen the rage on my face because she pulled her knees up to her chest and curled into a small ball. I went to our bedroom, packed enough clothes and toiletries for 2 days, and walked past Sarah to my car in the garage, not saying a word. She followed me, begging, "Please, Michael, don't go. It'll be okay. It's just one date, one night. After 20 years, surely you can give me that." I shook my head, unable to believe what I was hearing. That Thursday night, I checked into the Ritz-Carlton Hotel. Yes, the Ritz-Carlton. $400 a night, and I didn't care. If I was going to suffer, I was at least going to do it in comfort. The calls and texts from Sarah started right away, but I sent one response and then blocked her number. I told her I wouldn't be in touch until I returned home on Saturday after her betrayal. I'm sure that message hurt her. The next day at work, I had my secretary block all calls from my wife and instructed security not to let her into the building. I had my plan set and wasn't about to change it. I'm Michael Thompson, a man of action. People know me as reliable, someone who follows through, both at work and among friends. At home, I was the easygoing, accommodating guy who kept my macho side in check. It worked for 20 years, but I realize now I should have been more assertive and less complacent. But I loved my wife and treated her like a queen. I remember laughing at a quote once that now hits too close to home: "Treat her like a queen, and she'll treat you like a servant." Those words have become my reality, but I refuse to accept it. On Friday morning, I called my brother, a detective in Miami, and asked him for help. I told him what I needed, and he called James Foster, one of his colleagues who works as a private investigator. "James, this is Sergeant Walker. How are you, my friend? I need a favor. My brother needs your help tonight. Can you send someone to follow his wife and get all the information on this guy by Saturday morning? Run his numbers, get his address and phone number, and text them to me tonight. We also need pictures of them together if possible. It's urgent, but I owe you one, so I'll make it up to you. You need the perp's phone number and address tonight, and as soon as possible. We can dig up the rest of the photos and details tomorrow. What can you work with right now?" "Yeah, that's what we need. I'll send over the wife's address, the time she's leaving, and her date's name. I've been told he works at Brokers Unlimited and his name is Ryan, so you should be able to track him down easily. His wife gets home at 5 p.m., but we don't know when the date starts, so you'll need someone to leave the house before 5 p.m. to follow his wife when he picks her up. That's all we need for now. Send me the wife's address, and I'll handle the rest." Michael listened intently and smiled as his brother hung up. His plan was falling into place, and he was ready to confront his unfaithful wife. The situation required immediate action since time was of the essence. While Sarah and Ryan were out for dinner, Michael planned to visit Ryan's wife to explain what was happening and where their spouses were at that moment. Next, Michael called one of his old friends, Nick, to get the contact information for an escort service he used. Nick was going through a rough divorce and had no intention of marrying again, relying on an escort to meet his needs. Michael now understood why: no cheating, just sex, and likely cheaper than dealing with an unfaithful wife. The call went smoothly, and Michael arranged a night out with a young, attractive blonde. He added a $1,000 tip due to the unusual circumstances. Michael explained that he wanted a girlfriend experience, where the escort would act as though she'd been his loving partner for a long time. He made it clear that there should be no trouble, and if his wife happened to show up, the girl should not reveal that she was an escort but act as if she were someone he met that night. Michael anticipated that his wife would come and see them together. If she wanted a date with another man, he was prepared to reciprocate, but with a touch of sophistication. They planned to meet at a hotel, have a drink, and get to know each other before the fun began. Sarah, running her real estate business, had an open house every Saturday and never got home before 6 p.m. This Saturday was no exception. Flashing back to Thursday night, after Sarah declared her independence, she sat on the couch reflecting on their conversation, angrily addressing the empty room. "I can't believe he acted so childish. The way he left without saying a word, what a jerk." Sarah tried calling and texting Michael, growing increasingly frustrated when he didn't respond until a single text message came through. That message, mentioning betrayal, made her cringe and reconsider her plans. She had viewed the date as just a fun night out, not cheating, and pushed thoughts of betrayal aside. She thought to herself, "It's just one fun night. Michael will get over it, and we'll be back to normal. He's overreacting, but he'll forgive me, and I'll make it up to him tomorrow night. He can't say no to me, and I know exactly how to make it right." Friday night, Sarah returned to an empty house and reconsidered her plans. Should she go out with Ryan or cancel and ask Michael to come back? Eager for a fun evening, she decided to go ahead with her plans. She took a warm bath, shaved her legs, applied a luxurious lotion, and sat at her makeup table, transforming her appearance into a sultry vision. She admired the sexy woman in the mirror and smiled as she finished styling her long hair. She took the tags off her short, sexy dress and hung it on the mirror. She pulled on stockings she had never worn for Michael and attached them to a new garter belt she had bought earlier that day. As she adjusted the stockings, she remembered all the times Michael had asked her to dress up sexy. A pang of guilt struck her as she recalled Valentine's Day when Michael had given her sexy lingerie from Victoria's Secret and how she had reacted, questioning if he thought she was a slut and refusing to wear it. She stood still for a minute, contemplating how she had bought herself these provocative stockings for another man. The guilt didn't linger long. She quickly dismissed it and focused on her plans. She slipped into the silk dress, zipped it up, and was pleased with her decision to go without a bra. The result was stunning. She stood before the full-length mirror, admiring her long legs in black stockings and high heels. Her ample breasts jiggled beneath the dress, and her prominent nipples pressed against the thin fabric. "Oh my God, I look like a little slut, but this is so much fun," she thought. "I can't wait to see Ryan's reaction. But I should be clear, no sex tonight, just dinner and dancing." Sarah tried to convince herself that tonight's date with Ryan was just that, a date, and nothing more. But deep down, she knew she was battling some strong urges. The excitement about the evening had consumed her thoughts for the past month, and tonight was finally going to happen. Despite Michael's seemingly childish behavior, she was determined to enjoy herself. Sarah was certain Michael would understand and let her have this night because he always allowed her to do as she pleased. She loved him for that. Then, Michael's final phone call came in. He was giving Sarah one last chance to stop this runaway train and salvage their marriage. It was difficult for Michael to swallow his pride and make this call, but his love for Sarah remained strong. He was prepared to compromise his dignity, humiliate himself, and plead with her to reconsider and cancel the date. Sarah felt a twinge of nervousness and guilt when she saw Michael's name on her phone. She had just admired how sexy she looked in the mirror and knew her intentions were far from innocent. Yet, she really needed to hear from Michael, to make him understand and accept her decision. "Michael, thank you for calling. I miss you so much and love you so much. When are you coming home, baby?" Sarah said, her voice tinged with a mix of guilt and desperation. "Hi, Sarah. I love you too, and that's why I'm calling. I miss you so much, and my heart is breaking because of what you're planning. I'm begging you, don't go on this date. Please stay home, and I'll come to do whatever you want. I promise I'll make you happy and be the man you want me to be." If I'm falling short somewhere, I can fix it. I just want to be with you. Can you please cancel this date and save our marriage? Michael pleaded, his voice breaking with emotion. Hearing the tremor in Michael's voice, Sarah felt a pang of pity. It sounded weak and pitiful, which gave her an undeserved sense of power. She knew he loved her deeply and that Michael would forgive her if he understood her feelings. Their shared history, their children, and his love felt so strong, she was sure they would be together forever. Oh, Michael, I love you so much, and I can't wait to spend the rest of our lives together. I need to do this tonight, and it's not about our love for each other. It's just one night for me to go out and do something impulsive. Please understand and give me this chance, and I promise I will be yours again forever. I know you're hurting, and I'm sorry for that, but you're making too much of this. It's just dinner and a few drinks with a friend. Nothing will happen, and I'll be home tomorrow, ready to be your wife again. I love you, Michael, but I have to go, she said, tears welling in her eyes. Sarah wanted to hang up but heard Michael's desperate pleas as she ended the call. She wiped her tears, trying not to smudge her makeup, looked at herself in the mirror, and turned back to her reflection. I'm sure he thinks I'm being a bitch about this, but Michael, I'm sorry. I have to do this for me. Please don't be angry. She fixed her hair, adjusted her lips, spritzed on some perfume, and tried to push Michael out of her mind. Back in his hotel room, Michael stared at his phone after the call ended. The anger inside him flared up again. He had just begged his wife not to go on this date, and she had essentially told him this was happening, promising everything would be fine tomorrow. Grief overwhelmed him as he realized he had lost her, the only woman he had loved and been close to for the past 20 years. Meanwhile, James, the private investigator, was parked in his white van across the street from Michael and Sarah's home, observing as Sarah pulled into the garage shortly before 5 p.m. An hour later, he saw a car pull into the driveway. James recorded the license plate number, made a few calls, and 10 minutes later sent Walker and Michael the information they had requested. The home phone number and address were delivered to Walker and Michael's phones before the couple had even left. When Ryan entered the house, he noticed the sadness in Sarah's eyes. He realized she was feeling insecure and guilty about the situation, a common reaction from wives suddenly questioning their actions. Knowing he had to act fast, Ryan employed his skills to manipulate her. He liked a challenge and was determined to use his experience to change her mind. It's okay, Sarah. We don't have to go through with this. I completely understand. You can't go out with someone alone, even just for dinner or a movie. Your husband wants to protect you from predators, but if he only knew how much I care about you as a friend, he might feel differently. I'm disappointed we can't be together tonight, but I understand, Ryan said, offering comfort and reassurance. I was really looking forward to spending time with you and trying out that new restaurant. I've got an idea. How about we just grab dinner together, and then I'll drop you off at home. I'm sure you won't mind if you hang out with a friend for a while. His nonchalant attitude made Sarah feel reassured that having dinner was perfectly fine. Besides, she was already dressed up and, deep down, she was eager for the outing. At 7 p.m., James watched as the couple drove off towards a downtown restaurant. He promptly informed Walker and Michael of their location and continued to update them throughout the evening. Taking photos was easy, and James spent the next 4 hours capturing every moment of their dinner. He snapped shots of them holding hands as they entered a dance club, dancing, kissing, and acting like a loving couple. He even recorded videos of them slow dancing, where Ryan's hand wandered over Sarah's backside, caressed her breasts, and shared intimate kisses on the dance floor. James sent all the photos and videos before sunrise the next morning. At exactly 8 p.m., Michael made the call to Sarah's father, David. They had been close friends and golf buddies for years. Michael broke the bad news with a heavy heart. Hi, David, it's Michael. Hi, Michael. Are we still on for golf this Sunday? I'm not sure. I've got some bad news. Hi, David. It's Michael. Yes, Michael. What's going on? At the moment, your daughter is out on a date with a coworker. I thought things were fine between us, but she told me she needed more and started seeing this guy. You know I care about you and Linda, but I can't overlook this. I consider our marriage over. She's breached our prenup, and that's something I can't forgive. I wanted you to understand the reasons behind what's coming. I'm sorry it had to end this way. Michael, are you saying she's with someone else? Are you certain? This doesn't sound like her. David, I've hired a private investigator who's currently watching them. While we're talking, she's out with that guy. She's betraying me, our marriage, and our kids right now. I'm sorry, this is tough for me, but I respect you and wanted you to know the truth. I'm so sorry, Michael. Please don't do anything rash. I know she loves you, and maybe there's a chance to work things out. I'm sorry, David. I'm done. I'll call you soon. Maybe you two can figure it out. Let's plan for next Sunday. It sounds like it's going to be a rough weekend. After getting the address of the traitor from the investigator, Michael drove 20 minutes to Ryan's house to meet his wife, Lydia. She looked puzzled when Michael asked if she was Mrs. Carter, Ryan's wife. The 30-year-old mother of three answered the door wearing tight jeans and a lacy top that accentuated her well-endowed figure. Michael forced himself to maintain eye contact, trying to stay composed. Are you Mrs. Carter, Ryan's wife? Yes, is everything okay with him? He's fine, trust me. He works with my wife. May I come in for a moment? They sat in the living room while Michael delivered the distressing news. Mrs. Carter, I'm sorry to say this, but right now, your husband Ryan and my soon-to-be ex-wife are on a date. Yes, my wife told me just yesterday she needed more and that Ryan had been so generous that she felt compelled to repay him. Are you sure this is the right person? My Ryan usually plays cards on Friday nights. Mrs. Carter, I wouldn't be here if I wasn't certain. My private investigator is watching them as we speak. I have photos and videos to show you, but I wanted you to be aware of the situation. I felt terrible leaving her in tears, knowing that this affair might ruin their marriage. But that's the choice Ryan made. Saturday morning arrived. Michael poured himself a cup of the hotel's specialty coffee, savoring its pleasant aroma as he relaxed in his comfy bed. However, the comfort quickly turned to disgust and bitterness when he opened the pictures from the private investigator on his phone. The only silver lining was that Sarah had returned home by 1 a.m., and there hadn't been any sexual activity that night. Michael's rage surged as he reviewed the images of his wife's betrayal. Tears welled up as he watched the video of their kisses and Ryan's hand on Sarah's backside. The sight shattered any hope of reconciliation he had left. He also noticed Sarah's stockings, a gift he had given her months ago, and remembered her indifferent reaction to it. Her betrayal and disregard were unbearable, overwhelming him with a mix of humiliation and inferiority, which eventually morphed into anger. Apparently, Ryan had convinced Sarah to extend their evening beyond dinner and visit his favorite dance club. This choice marked the downfall of her marriage, and deep down, she had known it was wrong but went along with it anyway, wanting to experience it just this once. With tears in his eyes, Michael felt a sadness unlike anything he had ever known. He had shed tears when his mother passed away and mourned for friends who were no longer around, but this pain was something he had never imagined. As he replayed the video for the third time, pausing at the moment when Ryan was groping her and showing off her stockings, he shouted out into the empty room, "You're going to pay for this." He pondered over it, realizing that while she hadn't slept with Ryan, her actions were still unforgivable, disrespectful, and a complete betrayal of their marriage. On Saturday afternoon, Michael met Candy at the hotel at 2 p.m. They spent the next 2 hours getting acquainted. Michael had been clear about what he wanted, and Candy seemed like the perfect fit for his plans. They arrived back at his house just after 4 p.m., and by 5 p.m., they were in bed together. Before joining her, Michael placed a note he had written for Sarah on the front door. It read, "Sarah, last night you broke our marriage contract and wedding vows, not to mention my heart. Since you broke that contract, I no longer consider us married. Yes, legally we're still bound, but the contract is over, and now we're both free to do as we please. I plan to take the master bedroom as this is my home. You're welcome to use any other room in the house, but my bed is no longer yours. Your clothes and belongings are in the guest rooms. Please respect my personal space. You got your freedom, and now I have mine. I hope you're happy with your decision and your new life. Love, your ex-husband Michael." He removed his wedding ring and placed it on top of the letter, then took one of his collector knives and cut through the ring and the letter before stabbing the knife into the wooden door. It was the first thing Sarah would see when she got home that evening, at 6:10 p.m. When Sarah returned from work, she was unsettled by the sight of the knife in the door. It was a chilling image that would give anyone the creeps. She cautiously approached the door, scanning for anything else out of place. As she drew closer, she saw the note addressed to her, accompanied by Michael's engagement ring. Her heart raced, and tears streamed down her face as she read the letter. Clutching the ring and letter, she rushed into the house, desperately calling for Michael, her sobs echoing through the darkened hallway. The house was eerily quiet, except for some muffled noises coming from the bedroom. She ascended the stairs, listening at the door for sounds of activity. Anger and disbelief overtook her as she opened the door to find a young, attractive woman riding her husband, her large breasts bouncing with each movement. In stunned silence, Sarah watched the scene unfold. Furious, she screamed at her husband, "How could you, you bastard?" Then she fled the house, tears and rage driving her to her car. She sped over to her sister Lisa's house. Once there, after she had calmed down a bit, she recounted everything to Lisa, how she had caught her husband in bed with another woman and had nowhere else to turn. Her sister tried to comfort her. "This isn't like Michael at all. Of all people, I never thought he'd cheat on you. He's always shown you so much love and respect, more than any other man I know. I was always envious of how he treated you. This isn't like him. Has anything else happened? What do you think caused this, Sarah?" Sobbing quietly, Sarah responded, "I don't know. Maybe it's because I went out on a date last night. That's the only thing I can think of that might have set this off." "You went on a date? With whom?" "Just a guy from work. It was nothing sexual, just dinner and a little dancing." "Seriously? You went out with another man, had dinner, and danced, leaving your husband alone? Is that right?" "Well, yes, but you're making it sound worse than it was. Are you out of your mind? Do you really think Michael would be okay with you going out with someone else? I told him it was just a night out and nothing to do with sex, just some fun." "Sarah, you've really messed up. You might have lost your husband and ruined your marriage due to your selfishness and stupidity. You can stay here tonight, but tomorrow you need to go back and try to fix things. I'll call him and ask if you can speak to him, but I can't promise it'll make any difference. Prepare yourself for the worst. I know if my husband were in Michael's shoes, he'd be furious, and Michael is even more determined than Tom." Sarah spent the night alone in Lisa's guest room, crying until early morning and barely sleeping. Lisa texted Michael, asking him to call her back as soon as possible. Michael had always liked Lisa, so he knew why she was reaching out and called her back. "Hi, Lisa. How's it going?" "Hi, Michael. My sister is here, and she's told me everything about what happened at your house tonight. I don't blame you at all. I must say, you got your revenge pretty swiftly." Michael chuckled briefly. "Yeah, you know me, Lisa. I don't put up with nonsense," I told Lisa firmly. "I know Michael. Look, I get that Sarah messed up, but she's a wreck right now. I can't just cast her aside like that. You two need to have a conversation tomorrow. I'm not sure if you're really going to kick her out, and honestly, I wouldn't blame you if you did. But if she hasn't slept with this guy yet, maybe you should consider working things out. Maybe some counseling or even shock therapy for her damaged brain might help. Either way, please let her come back and talk tomorrow. Lisa, of course she can come back. It's still her house, and I didn't kick her out. She just won't be sharing my bed while she's here. I'm no longer upset or angry. My anger has turned into deep resentment over her betrayal. I'll let her talk, but I can't make any promises about the future. Right now, I hate her as much as I once loved her. My emotions are controlled by pain, and it would take a miracle for me to want her back. You're the smartest one in the family, Lisa. I can't believe my sister thought you'd be okay with her dating someone else. What a fool. Be patient and remember that she loves you. I hope she didn't go too far with that idiot. Goodbye, Lisa. Let her come home when she's ready. Bye, Michael. You're my favorite son-in-law, you know that. I know I love you. Goodbye, Lisa. Sunday afternoon rolled around. I came back from the gym and saw Sarah's car parked in the driveway. She was sitting at the kitchen table, trying to put on a brave face. You know we're not getting a divorce, she said with a strained smile. We can work this out because we love each other. I stayed silent, picked up my coffee cup, and sat across from her. Sarah nervously fidgeted with her hands in her lap. After a few sips of coffee, I finally broke the silence. Sarah, I'm okay with whatever happens. Divorce or not, it doesn't matter to me anymore. You broke our prenup, so as far as I'm concerned, the marriage is over. I no longer see us as a couple, and you're free to be with whoever you want, just like I am. The only change is that you won't be sleeping in my bed, and we won't be sexually involved. That ended the night you went out with your date. Michael, he's not my boyfriend, and nothing happened. Sarah, you went out with a man who isn't your husband. You dressed provocatively, had dinner, held hands, let him touch you, kissed him, and spent time with him. To you, it might seem like nothing, but to me, it's everything. That's what ended our marriage. So, if you want no divorce, then fine, we won't get one. But don't expect me to be with you again. No, I don't want a divorce. Give us time, and I'll be back in your bed. So, are you done seeing that little slut you were with? I'm not putting up with this. I started laughing and said, now that's funny. You broke our prenup, not me. You ended our marriage the moment you agreed to go out with your date. You set me free the moment you left with him. I'm not stopping my time with Candy. She's young, sexy, fun, and a fantastic lover. Honestly, it's the best sex I've ever had. We did things you never offered me, and now I know what I was missing. Why would I give that up? If you don't know this already, Sarah, while you were out with your date, I paid a visit to his lovely wife, Lydia. Did you know they have 3 beautiful children? Never mind, I'm sure you didn't consider that while you were with your lover. Anyway, she told me something interesting about Mr. Nice Guy. You're the 3rd woman Lydia has caught him with in the past year. She also mentioned that Rebecca Martin from your office was the last woman he cheated with, which led to her divorce. Ryan has a long history, but Lydia says he's done. She believes that once a cheater, always a cheater. I think you're in that category now. I think you could have found a better lover to cheat with, but I wouldn't know. Sounds like you and Ryan managed to ruin 2 families with 5 kids. Great job. Sarah looked shocked as she processed the news. The realization that her lover was just another unfaithful man hit her hard. Her anger at herself was palpable, and learning about Ryan's history left her horrified. She lost control, her frustration boiling over. Michael, he's not my boyfriend. You have to stop saying that. I can't believe you went to her house and told her he was cheating. My God, it was just dinner. You're really cruel and hurtful. And what about you? I countered. Having another woman in my house is inexcusable. This has to stop. It was just dinner. Have you forgotten about the dirty dancing, kissing, and touching at the club? I promised Lydia copies of all the photos and videos, so she'll have evidence when Ryan tries to downplay it. I know you think it's not cheating, but in the real world, it's exactly that. Betraying your marriage by being with someone else is cheating. When are you going to understand that? So, you think I'm cruel and hurtful? I'm curious, how do you define what you've been doing? Loving and caring? No, I'm not giving up my time with Candy. If you can't handle that, you don't have to stay. No, Michael, I want you to stop seeing her and be with me. I promise I won't see anyone else. Oh, you promise? Funny how your promise to be my wife and forsake all others turned out to be worthless. Sarah, if you don't like our arrangement, you're free to leave or get a divorce. Maybe you can move in with your lover since he'll need a new place to stay too. You two deserve each other. Well, you could stay here or maybe move in with your sister Lisa, I said coldly. I'm sure she'd be thrilled to have you there. You'd be a great role model for her girls. Michael, are you going to stop seeing that woman? Don't you love me? Don't you want us to be together again? Sarah, it's too late for that. The moment you told me you wanted to be with another man, you destroyed everything. Do I still love you? Yes, but my trust is shattered. How can I trust and love someone who so easily walked away from our marriage? No real man would tolerate his wife being with someone else, but you went ahead and did it anyway. You made it clear you were going to be with another man, regardless of my feelings. Now you need to face the consequences of your actions. I want to be with Candy, a young, sexy woman who offers me things I never knew I was missing. Seeing me with her must be hard for you, but now you know some of my pain. Payback can be harsh, but you brought this on yourself. As for divorce, that's your decision. We can live together as housemates and see how things go, or you can agree to the divorce, and I'll have the papers ready in a week. Your words mean nothing to me right now, I said firmly. Sarah understood the gravity of my tone and knew not to push me further. For the next month, I brought Candy home every weekend. We were together in bed multiple times a day, and it was exhilarating. She made me feel good about myself and helped me regain the confidence that Sarah's betrayal had eroded. Sarah hated the weekends and begged me to stop seeing Candy, but I didn't relent. Sarah would leave as soon as Candy and I arrived on Saturday night and wouldn't return until Candy was gone. I had Sarah text me after Candy left. I must admit, part of me enjoyed the revenge and the pain it inflicted on Sarah. But as time passed, I started to feel guilty. The excitement with Candy was purely physical, and the cost was becoming too much. After Sarah came back on Sunday night, I told her I wouldn't be seeing Candy for a while and that I was looking for someone else to be with. Sarah begged me to take her back and stop seeing other women. Michael, you've punished me enough. Every week, I had to watch another woman come into our home and be with the man I love. The pain is unbearable, and I can't stand seeing you with someone else. Please, give me another chance. I know I can't compete with a girl like that, but I can give you love and everything no one else can. Her plea took me by surprise. Love? I asked, incredulous. Do you even know what love is? Love isn't about turning your back on your spouse and dating other men. You broke that promise the moment you decided to be with someone else. So, no, I don't think you understand love, and you can't give away what you don't truly possess. But here's what I'll do. I won't date anyone else until we have counseling. If we can work things out, maybe there's a future for us. Sarah leaped off the couch, hugging and kissing me fervently. Thank you, baby. I promise I'll make it up to you. Not so fast, I warned. I'm not forgiving you yet. I'm just giving us one last chance before I make a final decision about your cheating. Michael, don't say that. You love me, and I know we'll always be together. Can I sleep with you tonight, please? She asked, kissing me. No, not yet. I can still see the images of you with that other man in my head. The memory of you kissing him and letting him touch you haunts me constantly. I'm still furious at you for hurting me and wrecking our marriage. You're lucky our children don't know about this, otherwise, I wonder what they'd think of their mother. I'm still angry, and we'll take our time with counseling. I've made an appointment with Dr. Reynolds for Tuesday, and we'll start the painful process of reliving all this twice a week for the next 3 months. It's the same therapy you read about in stories, just as painful and tedious. I had to revisit the affair and listen to endless discussions. Life would have been much simpler if you had stayed true to our vows, but I suppose that was too much to ask. After 3 months of counseling, we made some progress. Sarah realized the extent of the pain she caused and understood my reaction. She complained about the revenge sex, but I reminded her that she had broken our prenup, giving me a free pass to do as I pleased. She eventually accepted that, though she was still unhappy. The counselor gave me a hard time about my revenge, but I didn't care. I would do it again if I had to. I let Sarah back into the house with a postnuptial agreement. She agreed to forfeit everything if she had any extramarital affairs. She accepted a GPS tracker on her phone, allowed me access to her email and text messages, and promised complete honesty with no cheating. I made it clear that any infidelity, emotional or physical, would result in her being kicked out. She promised never to let another man flirt with her and to remain faithful. Even though Sarah was determined to prove her love and commitment, I couldn't shake Lydia's words from my mind, once a cheater, always a cheater. A year later, things were somewhat back to normal, but I kept a closer watch on Sarah, knowing the possibility of it happening again. Her sister Lisa and I worked together to make sure Sarah stayed on track. Ryan's divorce had cost him dearly. His wife had kicked him out, took the house, and received alimony and child support for their 3 kids. Ryan was now living in a small studio apartment, broke after paying for his infidelity. Ironically, he lost everything for a few dinners, dances, and kisses. What a fool. Sarah was mortified when she learned about Ryan's previous affairs and how he had caused Laura's divorce. She realized how close she came to ruining her life and family's love. Determined never to repeat her mistakes, she committed to proving her love to me and our children. Despite her efforts, the image of that young woman with her husband haunted her, and she vowed never to let him stray again. Ryan's story was a cautionary tale about the cost of infidelity. 2 years after his divorce from Laura, Eric, an unwilling cuckold, confronted Ryan outside a pub. Hours later, Ryan was found unconscious on the sidewalk, with broken arms, a broken rib, and punctured testicles. Time will tell if Ryan ever learns his lesson. As the saying goes, not one scar on my heart came from an enemy. They came from people who said they loved me.